The champagne flute shattered against marble golden liquid, spreading like blood across the pristine floor, as Victoria Kane's voice cut through the Starlight Gala like a blade. "That waitress just stole my $100,000 diamond necklace." 500 of New York's most powerful elite turned to stare at Elena Morales, a nobody in a server's uniform standing frozen as the city's most feared woman pointed an accusing finger at her. But what Victoria didn't know was that this quiet girl held a secret that would destroy everything the millionaire's wife had built on lies. If you want to see how one ordinary waitress brought down Manhattan's untouchable queen, watch until the end and comment your city below, so I can see how far this story of courage has traveled. The autumn rain hammered against the windows of Aurelia like an army of desperate fingers, each drop racing down the glass in rivulets that distorted the glowing streetlights of Manhattan's Upper East Side. Inside the restaurant, warmth emanated from crystal chandeliers that cast honeyed light across tables dressed in Irish linen, where New York's elite dissected each other's lives between bites of $60 appetizers. The maitre d' stood at his post like a general surveying a battlefield, his practiced eye sweeping across the dining room, where fortunes were made and destroyed over vintage Bordeaux. But tonight, something electric crackled through the air, a tension that made even the seasoned staff exchange nervous glances. The source of this atmospheric shift sat at table 7, the power table everyone knew belonged to one couple alone, Edward and Victoria Kane. Victoria Kane entered Aurelia the way a storm enters a harbor, inevitable, destructive, and impossible to ignore. Her Louboutin heels clicked against Italian marble with metronomic precision, each step a declaration of dominance. The black Givenchy dress she wore seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an aura of darkness that preceded her like a herald. Her platinum blonde hair, styled to architectural perfection, never moved despite her purposeful stride. Behind her, Edward Kane followed with the casual arrogance of a man who'd crushed competitors for sport, his gray eyes scanning the room for potential prey or problems. "Mrs. Kane," the maitre d' practically genuflected, "your table is ready as always." Victoria didn't acknowledge him. Acknowledgement implied equality, and in her universe no one was equal to Victoria Kane. She moved through the restaurant like a queen through a crowd of peasants, her arctic blue eyes cataloging every perceived slight, every microscopic imperfection. A busboy who didn't step aside quickly enough would find himself unemployed by morning. A server whose smile seemed forced would be blacklisted from every high-end establishment in the city. Elena Morales watched this entrance from behind the service station, her artist's eye capturing every detail despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. She'd been working at Aurelia for exactly 3 days, 3 days of learning the intricate dance of serving New York's ultra-wealthy, 3 days of memorizing wine pairings and the personal preferences of regular patrons, 3 days of pretending her hands didn't shake when she carried plates worth more than her monthly rent. "That's her," whispered Marcus, a senior waiter, whose hands trembled despite his 20 years of experience. "Victoria Kane. Whatever you do, don't look her in the eyes. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for God's sake, don't make a mistake." "What happens if you make a mistake?" Elena asked, though she immediately regretted the question when she saw Marcus's face drain of color. "Remember Jennifer, the sommelier who worked here last month?" Marcus's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "She recommended a wine pairing Mrs. Kane didn't approve of. One phone call from Victoria and Jennifer didn't just lose this job, she couldn't get hired at a coffee shop. The woman has connections everywhere. Banks, restaurants, galleries, even hospitals. Cross her and you don't just lose your job, you lose your future." Elena absorbed this information while watching Victoria settle into her seat like an empress taking her throne. The way other diners unconsciously leaned away from table 7, The way conversations dimmed when Victoria's gaze swept the room. The way even Edward, a man who'd destroyed entire companies, deferred to his wife's choices. This wasn't just wealth. This was weaponized power. New girl, ma. The head server materialized beside Elena like a specter of doom. You're taking table 7 tonight. The words hit Elena like ice water. But I've only been here 3 days. Mrs. Kane specifically requested the newest server. The head server's expression was sympathetic but firm. She enjoys testing new staff. Consider it a trial by fire. Elena's mind raced. She needed this job desperately. The art studio she'd worked at for 5 years had closed abruptly when the owner died, leaving her scrambling for income to pay for her mother's medical bills and her younger brother's college tuition. Aurelia paid more in a week than most restaurants paid in a month, but now she understood why. Taking a deep breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart, Elena smoothed her uniform, picked up her order pad with forced steadiness, and walked toward table 7. Each step felt like walking toward an executioner, the distance simultaneously too short and eternal. She could feel eyes on her other servers watching with a mixture of pity and relief that it wasn't them diners pausing mid-conversation to witness what they sensed would be entertaining blood sport. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Kane. Elena said, proud that her voice remained steady despite the tremor in her hands. Welcome to Aurelia. May I start you with, you may start by standing up straight. Victoria's voice cut through Elena's greeting like a scalpel through silk. Your posture is atrocious. Didn't they train you, or did they simply pull you off the street? Elena straightened her spine, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. My apologies, Mrs. Kane. May I tell you about tonight's specials? I don't care about specials, Victoria said, her eyes so pale they seemed almost colorless, studying Elena with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. I care about competence. Bring me a glass of the 2015 Chateau d'Yquem, temperature, exactly 46 degrees Fahrenheit. 1 degree warmer or cooler, and I'll know. My husband will have his usual, I assume you know what that is. Elena didn't know. She'd been told about regular orders, but Edward Kane's preferences hadn't been covered in her brief training. She could feel sweat beading at her hairline. If you don't know... Victoria continued, a smile playing at her lips that had nothing to do with warmth. Perhaps you should find employment more suited to your capabilities. McDonald's is always hiring. The Macallan 25 neat with a single ice sphere made from filtered water, Edward said, his voice carrying a hint of weariness. Don't torment the girl too much, Victoria. It's been a long day. Torment? Victoria's laugh was like breaking crystal. I'm simply maintaining standards, darling. Standards that seem to be slipping everywhere these days. She turned back to Elena. Well, are you going to stand there like a statue, or are you going to do your job? Elena nodded and retreated to the bar, her face burning. She could hear Victoria's voice carrying across the dining room, not quite loud enough to be considered shouting, but certainly intended to be heard. The quality of staff here has deteriorated dramatically. You'd think for these prices they could hire people with at least a modicum of intelligence. At the bar, Thomas the bartender, who'd been kind to Elena during her first days, prepared the drinks with practiced efficiency. Don't let her get to you, he said quietly. She does this to everyone. It's like she feeds on making people miserable. Why doesn't anyone stand up to her? Elena asked, watching Thomas carefully measure the temperature of the dessert wine. You ever try to fight a hurricane with your bare hands? Thomas handed her the drinks on a silver tray. That's Victoria Kane. She doesn't just have money, she has power. The kind that can end careers, destroy reputations, ruin lives. Last year, a restaurant manager tried to ban her after she reduced 3 servers to tears in one night. Within a week, the health department found 17 violations they'd never noticed before the manager's mortgage was mysteriously called in early, and his daughter lost her scholarship to Columbia. All coincidences, of course. Elena carried the drinks back to table 7, her mind processing this information. She'd grown up poor, understood the weight of financial struggle, but this was different. This was wealth turned into a weapon, privilege transformed into poison. "Your drinks," she said, setting them down with careful precision. Victoria lifted the wine glass, examining it like a jeweler inspecting a diamond. She took a small sip, held it in her mouth for a moment, then set the glass down with deliberate force. "This is 47 degrees, she announced. "I specifically said 46. Are you incapable of following simple instructions, or are you deliberately trying to ruin my evening?" Elena knew Thomas had been exact with the temperature. She'd watched him check it twice. But arguing would be futile. "I'll bring you another immediately, Mrs. Kane." "You'll bring me the bottle," Victoria corrected. "I'll pour it myself, since clearly the staff here can't manage even the simplest tasks. And while you're at it, have the kitchen prepare the degustation menu, but tell Chef Laurent that if he uses truffle oil instead of actual truffles like he did last time, I'll make sure every food critic in the city knows about it." The evening continued in this vein, with Victoria finding fault in everything. The bread was sliced too thick, the butter too cold, the lighting too dim, then too bright when adjusted. Each complaint was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep without leaving visible wounds. Elena noticed how Edward said nothing, simply consumed his whiskey, and checked his phone occasionally, sighing when Victoria's criticisms became particularly harsh. Around them, the restaurant's atmosphere had shifted. Other diners ate quickly, eager to escape the toxic energy radiating from table 7. Servers took long routes to avoid passing too close. Even the usual ambient conversation had dimmed to whispers, as if everyone was afraid of drawing Victoria's attention. "This soup," Victoria announced loudly, after the first course arrived, "is lukewarm. How does a restaurant of this supposed caliber serve lukewarm soup?" She pushed the bowl away with theatrical disgust. "Bring me the chef. I want to hear his excuse personally." Elena knew the soup had been the perfect temperature. She'd watched the expediter check it before it left the kitchen. But she dutifully went to fetch Chef Laurent, a proud Frenchman who'd trained at Le Bernardin and who didn't take criticism lightly. "She wants the soup hotter." Chef Laurent's face reddened. "That soup is exactly 145 degrees, the perfect temperature for bisque. Any hotter, and it would scald the palate, ruin the delicate flavors. This woman wouldn't know fine cuisine if it—" "Please," Elena interrupted. Could you speak with her? She's making a scene." Chef Laurent stormed out of the kitchen, his tall chef's hat adding to his imposing height. But the moment he saw Victoria Kane, his bravado evaporated like steam. Elena watched in amazement as the chef who'd once thrown a pan at a line cook for overcooking fish approached table 7 with the deference of a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "Mrs. Kane," he began, his accent thicker under stress. "I assure you the soup—" "Are you arguing with me?" Victoria's voice was silk wrapped around steel. "Are you actually standing here in front of all these people telling me I don't know what I'm tasting?" "No, madame, My husband's company is considering this venue for our annual shareholders' dinner. 500 guests each paying $500 a plate." Victoria's smile was predatory. "I suppose I'll have to tell him to look elsewhere. And I'll be sure to mention why in my review for the Times. I believe my friend at the food section would be very interested to hear about a chef who argues with customers." Chef Laurent's face cycled through several colors before settling on a defeated gray. My apologies, madame. I'll prepare you a new soup immediately. As he retreated to the kitchen, Elena caught a glimpse of his expression. Humiliation mixed with rage, the look of a man forced to swallow his pride or lose everything he'd worked for. It was a look she recognized from her own father years ago, when his construction company had been destroyed by a larger corporation's legal team. The powerful didn't just win, they ensured everyone knew they'd won. The evening dragged on each course, bringing new complaints, new humiliations. Victoria seemed to take particular pleasure in finding creative ways to belittle Elena, commenting on her peasant hands, suggesting she'd be more comfortable in a food truck, wondering aloud if she could even read the wine list or if she was just guessing. Through it all, Elena maintained her composure, though she could feel something building inside her, not just anger, but a kind of clarity. She watched Victoria the way she'd learned to observe subjects for her art, noting the tells that betrayed the woman beneath the facade. The way Victoria's eyes constantly scanned the room, checking if people were watching her. The slight tension in her jaw when Edward ignored her in favor of his phone. The almost imperceptible flinch when a woman at another table laughed, genuine unforced laughter that drew Edward's attention for just a moment. This wasn't just cruelty, it was performance. Victoria Kane was playing a role, and her cruelty was the script she'd written for herself. But why? What was she so afraid of that she needed to inspire fear in everyone around her? This meat is overcooked, Victoria announced during the main course, though Elena could see the perfect pink center from where she stood. I specifically ordered medium rare, and this is clearly medium. Can no one in this establishment follow simple directions? I'll have the kitchen prepare another, Elena began. No. Victoria stood abruptly, throwing her napkin on the table like a gauntlet. I've had enough incompetence for one evening. The food is inedible, the service is abysmal, and I've wasted 2 hours of my life in this charade of a restaurant. The entire dining room fell silent. Every eye turned to table 7, where Victoria stood like an avenging angel in designer clothing, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. This used to be an establishment of quality, she continued, her voice rising. Now it's staffed by amateurs and serving food I wouldn't feed to my dog. This girl, she gestured dismissively at Elena, is the perfect example of the decline. Untrained, unprofessional, and clearly out of her depth. Elena felt every word like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain still to keep her expression neutral. Around her, other diners looked away in second-hand embarrassment, while the staff stood frozen, unsure how to respond to such a public scene. We're leaving, Victoria announced. And I'll be sure everyone knows exactly why. By tomorrow, every person who matters in this city will know what Aurelia has become. Edward stood slowly, pulling out his wallet and dropping several $100 bills on the table, far more than necessary for their incomplete meal. For the staff, he said quietly, not meeting Elena's eyes. I apologize for... Don't you dare apologize for me. Victoria snapped, her composure cracking for just a moment before she reassembled her mask of cold superiority. We're leaving, now. As they walked toward the exit, Victoria stopped beside Elena one last time. She leaned in close, her perfume something expensive and suffocating filling Elena's nostrils. You should quit now, Victoria whispered, her breath cold against Elena's ear. Save yourself the humiliation of being fired, because I promise you by the end of the week you won't just lose this job. I'll make sure you never work in this city again. That's what happens to people who disappoint me. Then she was gone, leaving behind only the echo of her heels on marble and a dining room full of people who suddenly found their plates very interesting. Elena stood there trembling, not with fear, but with a rage she hadn't felt since watching her father's business crumble, since seeing her mother work 3 jobs to keep their family afloat, since every moment in her life when someone with power had crushed someone without it simply because they could. "I'm so sorry." The manager appeared beside her, his face grave. "Take the rest of the night off. We'll figure out what to do tomorrow." Elena nodded numbly and walked to the staff room to gather her things. Her hands shook as she changed out of her uniform, but not from fear. She pulled out her phone and did something she hadn't done in years. She searched for Victoria Kane online. The results were overwhelming. Society pages, charity events, business journals. Victoria Kane was everywhere. Always photographed with the same perfect smile, always described in the same glowing terms: philanthropist, socialite, pillar of society. But Elena had learned to look beyond surfaces in her art, to see the shadows that defined the light. She scrolled deeper past the recent articles to older ones, looking for something she wasn't sure what. Then she found it buried in a business journal from 15 years ago, a small mention of a lawsuit against Edward Kane's company, alleging fraud and embezzlement. The case had been dismissed when a key witness, a young accountant named Hannah Gale, had changed her testimony. Hannah Gale. The name tugged at something in Elena's memory. She searched for Hannah Gale and found almost nothing. A few employment records, an old address, then nothing. It was as if Hannah Gale had vanished from existence 15 years ago, right around the time Victoria Kane had appeared on the scene as Edward's new bride. Elena's artist's eye studied the few photos she could find of Hannah Gale, a young woman with dark hair and frightened eyes testifying at a preliminary hearing. Then she looked at photos of Victoria Kane from her wedding to Edward, just months after the lawsuit was dismissed. The face structure was different, clearly, the result of extensive plastic surgery, but the eyes, those pale, almost colorless eyes, were the same. "Oh my God," Elena whispered to herself in the empty staff room. Victoria Kane was Hannah Gale. The woman who'd helped Edward escape justice had transformed herself into his wife, burying her past beneath designer clothes and surgical alterations. But why keep the same unusual eye color vanity or some deeper psychological need to retain something of her true self? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Marcus peered in his face, concerned. "You okay? That was brutal even for her." "I'm fine," Elena said, though her mind was racing. "Marcus, you've been here a long time. Do you remember when Victoria and Edward Kane first started coming here?" Marcus thought for a moment. "About 14 years ago, right after they got married." "Why?" "Just curious. Did Victoria ever mention what she did before she married Edward?" "Are you kidding? Victoria Kane doesn't discuss her past?" "There were rumors, of course. Some said she was a model. Others said she came from old money in Europe. But nobody really knows. It's like she appeared out of nowhere, fully formed as Mrs. Edward Kane." He paused. "Why are you asking?" "No reason." Elena lied. "Just trying to understand her." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Understand Victoria Kane? You might as well try to understand a tornado. She's a force of nature, destructive, unpredictable, and impossible to stop. Just be careful, Elena. I know tonight was hard, but don't do anything stupid. People who cross Victoria Kane don't just lose, they disappear." After Marcus left, Elena sat alone in the staff room, her mind working through possibilities. She had information that could destroy Victoria Kane, reveal her as a fraud who'd built her empire on lies and betrayal. But what could she, a nobody waitress, do with it? Victoria had power, connections, resources. Elena had nothing but the truth, and she'd learned long ago that truth without power was just noise. Her phone buzzed with a text from her younger brother. "Hey sis, thanks for the tuition payment. Only one more semester till graduation, you're the best." Elena stared at the message, remembering why she'd taken this job, why she needed it so desperately. Her family depended on her. She couldn't afford to make enemies of people like Victoria Kane. She should forget what she'd discovered, keep her head down, and hope Victoria's threat to get her fired was just bluster. But as she left Aurelia that night, walking through rain that had turned to mist, Elena couldn't forget the look on Chef Laurent's face, the trembling in Marcus's hands, the way an entire restaurant full of successful people had cowered before one woman's cruelty. Victoria Kane didn't just hurt people, she enjoyed. It fed on it, needed it, like an addiction. Over the next 3 days, Elena watched and waited. Victoria didn't return to Aurelia immediately, but her presence lingered like a curse. The manager was nervous, constantly checking Elena's work, suggesting she might be happier at a different restaurant. Other servers avoided her as if her bad luck might be contagious. Even Chef Laurent seemed subdued, his usual passionate outbursts replaced by quiet efficiency. Elena used her breaks to research, more careful to use the public library computers rather than her phone or home laptop. She learned about Edward Kane's rise to power, a series of hostile takeovers, bankrupted competitors, and lawsuits that always seemed to disappear before reaching court. And always, there was Victoria at his side, the perfect wife who hosted the perfect parties where deals were made and futures were destroyed. She found articles about people who'd opposed the Kanes, a journalist who'd investigated Edward's business practices, and then suddenly moved to Thailand, claiming he needed a lifestyle change. A city councilman who'd questioned a development deal and then resigned after photos surfaced of him at a party he swore he'd never attended. A prosecutor who'd been building a case against Edward's company and then died in a car accident that was ruled accidental, despite witnesses saying another car had run him off the road. These weren't just bad people. They were dangerous people. And Elena was a nobody with a dangerous secret, like holding a live grenade with no way to throw it without destroying herself in the explosion. On the 4th day, Victoria Kane returned to Aurelia. Elena was serving another table when she heard the familiar click of those Louboutin heels. Her blood turned to ice as she turned to see Victoria entering, but this time she was alone. No Edward to provide even the minimal buffer his presence offered. Victoria moved through the restaurant with predatory grace, and Elena knew with sick certainty that she was the prey. "You," Victoria said, appearing beside Elena's table with such suddenness that the elderly couple Elena was serving jumped. "You're still here. How surprising. I thought I'd made myself clear about your future at this establishment." "Mrs. Kane," Elena said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I'll be with you in just a moment." "You'll be with me now," Victoria interrupted. "These people can wait." She turned to the elderly couple with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You don't mind, do you? I'm sure you understand that some customers are more significant than others." The elderly man started to protest, but his wife placed a restraining hand on his arm, recognizing Victoria and the danger she represented. They looked down at their plates in silent acquiescence. "Table 7, Victoria commanded, walking away without checking if Elena was following. Elena apologized to the elderly couple and followed Victoria, feeling like she was walking to her own execution. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Victoria settled into her usual seat, her pale eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "No menu," Victoria said. "Bring me a glass of Champagne Dom Perignon 2008 vintage, if you even know what that is." Elena knew they didn't have that specific vintage, but she also knew Victoria knew that. This was a test, a trap with no right answer. I'll check with the sommelier about that specific vintage. Of course you will. Victoria smiled, a predator baring its teeth. Because you don't know anything, do you? Where did they find you? What gutter did they pull you from to disgrace this establishment? The words hit their mark, but Elena had spent 4 days preparing for this moment. She'd made a decision the night before that, lying awake in her small apartment, thinking about her father's crushed dreams and her mother's exhausted face. Sometimes she'd realized the only way to stop a bully was to stop being afraid of what they could do to you. I came from the same place we all come from, Mrs. Kane, Elena said quietly. A past that shapes us whether we acknowledge it or not. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. Excuse me. I'll get your champagne, Elena said, turning away before Victoria could respond. At the bar, Thomas looked at her with concern. We don't have the 2008, only the 2010. I know, Elena said. She knows too. Just give me the 2010. She'll destroy you for this. Maybe, Elena agreed. Or maybe not. She carried the champagne back to table 7, where Victoria waited like a spider in her web. The restaurant had gone quiet again, everyone sensing the tension crackling between them. The 2010 vintage, Elena said, setting down the glass. The 2008 wasn't available. Victoria's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. Of course it wasn't. Because this place, like you, is second-rate. Tell me, what did you do before degrading yourself here? Were you a cashier, a cleaner? Something even more pathetic? I was an artist, Elena replied, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. I painted portraits. I was good at seeing past the surface, finding the truth underneath. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Was it fear? But it was gone so quickly, Elena couldn't be sure. An artist, Victoria repeated mockingly. How precious. And now you serve real people who actually contribute to society. How far you've fallen. We all fall sometimes, Elena said carefully. The question is what we do after. Some people rebuild themselves entirely, become someone new. Sometimes they even change their name. This time there was no mistaking the flash of fear in Victoria's eyes. Her hand tightened on the champagne glass until her knuckles went white. What did you say? Victoria's voice had dropped to a whisper. I said people can change, Elena replied innocently. Reinvent themselves. Isn't that what New York is all about? Becoming who you want to be instead of who you were? Victoria stood abruptly, the champagne untouched. You have no idea who you're talking to. I think I do, Elena said quietly, so only Victoria could hear. Hannah. The color drained from Victoria's face so completely that for a moment Elena thought she might faint. Then, with visible effort, Victoria composed herself, though her hands trembled slightly. You're fired, Victoria said, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. Clear out your things and leave. If I see you here again, if I see you anywhere in my vicinity, you'll regret it for the rest of your very short, very miserable life. Elena nodded and walked away, feeling Victoria's eyes burning into her back. She went to the staff room, gathered her things, and left through the back entrance. She'd lost her job just as Victoria had promised. But she'd also done something. No one else had dared. She'd made Victoria Kane afraid. That night, Elena's phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. You think you're clever? Victoria's voice was different on the phone, rawer, less controlled. You think you've found something you can use against me. I think I found the truth, Elena replied. The truth. Victoria laughed bitterly. You have no idea what the truth is. You don't know what I've been through, what I've had to do to survive. Then tell me. There was a long pause. "Come to the St. Regis bar tomorrow at 8. Come alone. If you bring anyone, if you tell anyone, you'll never see morning." The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, knowing she was either about to learn something extraordinary or walking into a trap. Probably both. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? That she'd discovered a socialite had changed her name that wasn't illegal. The statute of limitations on the testimony in Edward's trial had long passed. Victoria might be Hannah Gale, but that knowledge alone wasn't enough to bring her down. The next evening, Elena arrived at the St. Regis bar 10 minutes early. The place was everything Aurelia was: expensive, exclusive, and intimidating. She felt underdressed in her only decent outfit, a simple black dress she'd worn to her father's funeral. The bartender looked at her skeptically until she mentioned she was meeting Victoria Kane, and then his entire demeanor changed to one of fearful deference. Victoria arrived exactly at 8, dressed in a blood-red dress that made her look like a wound against the bar's muted elegance. She sat beside Elena without greeting, ordering a martini with specific instructions that took nearly a minute to convey. "You did your homework," Victoria said finally, not looking at Elena. "I'm impressed and irritated. Do you know how much I've spent ensuring Hannah Gale stayed buried?" "Why keep the eyes?" Elena asked. "You changed everything else." Victoria touched the corner of her eye unconsciously. "Vanity. Stupidity. A reminder, perhaps. Does it matter?" "It might." Victoria finally turned to look at her. "What do you want?" "Money, a job, a recommendation letter. Name your price and let's end this charade." "I want to know why," Elena said. "Why the cruelty? Why hurt people who can't fight back?" Victoria's laugh was bitter. "Can't fight back. Do you have any idea what it's like to have no power, to be nobody?" Hannah Gale was nobody, a scholarship kid from Newark who thought an accounting degree would change her life. She was 23 when she got hired at Kane Enterprises, so grateful for the opportunity she would have done anything to keep that job. The martini arrived and Victoria took a long sip before continuing. "Edward noticed me because I found discrepancies in the books. Millions of dollars being moved through shell companies. I was young and stupid enough to think I was doing the right thing by bringing it to his attention." She laughed bitterly. "He thanked me for my diligence. Then he explained that I could either help him hide those discrepancies better, or I could disappear. And he showed me photos of other people who'd disappointed him, people who'd had accidents, whose families had suffered tragedies. I was 23, alone in the city, terrified." "So you helped him," Elena said. "I did more than help. I became indispensable. I learned how he thought, what he wanted, how to anticipate his needs. And when the FBI started investigating, I was the perfect witness, the innocent accountant, who could testify that everything was legal, just complex financial structures that looked suspicious, but weren't." Victoria's smile was self-loathing. "My testimony saved him from prison. And then I told him I wanted something in return." "You wanted to marry him." "I wanted to become someone else entirely, someone with power, someone who would never be vulnerable again." Victoria's eyes were distant, lost in memory. Edward found it amusing, his little accountant wanting to play princess. But I'd proven my value and I knew his secrets. So he agreed. Hannah Gale disappeared, and Victoria Kane was born. "But the cruelty is my armor," Victoria interrupted. "If everyone fears you, no one looks too close. If everyone hates you, no one tries to know you. I've been Victoria Kane so long that sometimes I forget Hannah Gale ever existed, until some little nobody waitress decides to excavate the past." They sat in silence for a moment, Elena processing this confession, while Victoria stared into her martini as if it held absolution. "You could have chosen differently," Elena said finally. You had power as Victoria Kane. You could have used it to help people instead of hurt them. Victoria's laugh was sharp. Help people. Like people helped Hannah Gale when she was drowning in student loans. Like they helped when her mother died of cancer because they couldn't afford treatment. Where was help when I needed it? So you became the monster instead of fighting it. I became a survivor, Victoria corrected. And survivors do whatever it takes. My father wasn't a survivor then, Elena said quietly. When the Kane Corporation destroyed his construction company with lawsuits he couldn't afford to fight, he didn't become cruel. He just broke. Victoria went very still. What was your father's name? Miguel Morales. Morales Construction. You probably don't remember, it was 8 years ago. Just another small company that got in the way of a Kane development project. Victoria's face had gone pale again. The Riverside project. I remember, I prepared the documents that buried his company in litigation. He killed himself 2 years later, Elena said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Couldn't live with the shame of losing everything, of failing his family. My mother worked herself into an early grave trying to keep us afloat. So don't talk to me about survival, Victoria. Some people survive without becoming monsters. Victoria was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was smaller, younger, maybe a hint of Hannah Gale bleeding through. I'm sorry, she said, and for the first time she seemed to mean something she said. I never thought about the faces behind the names on those documents. That's the problem, Elena said. You stopped seeing people as people. They became obstacles, threats, or tools, but never humans with their own pain and struggles. What do you want from me? Victoria asked again, but this time it wasn't a negotiation, it was genuine confusion. You could destroy me with what you know. Why haven't you? Because I'm not you, Elena replied. But I want you to stop. Stop hurting people. Stop using your power to crush anyone who annoys you. Stop being the monster you think you need to be. Victoria laughed, but it was hollow. And if I don't, then I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who Hannah Gale was and what she did. Every society page, every gossip column, every business journal. Your carefully constructed life will collapse, and this time you won't be able to rebuild it. You're threatening me. Victoria's voice regained some of its edge. You have no idea what I could do to you. Your brother's in college, isn't he pre-med at Columbia? It would be a shame if there were suddenly questions about his admission essay, if someone suggested he'd plagiarized it. Elena's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to remain calm. You're proving my point. Your first instinct is to hurt, to threaten. But think about it, Victoria. What has all that cruelty gotten you? You're sitting here terrified that a nobody waitress might expose you. You're surrounded by people who fear you, but not one who loves you. Even Edward doesn't love you, he just owns you like you own that red dress. Victoria flinched as if slapped. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know he was on his phone all through dinner while you performed your cruelty. I know he looks at you like you're a particularly useful possession, not a person. I know you're so desperate for control that you have to humiliate waiters and threaten college kids because it's the only power that feels real. Stop, Victoria said, and for the first time her voice cracked. Hannah Gale might have been powerless, Elena continued, but she was real. She had a chance to be someone good, someone whole. You killed her for this. She gestured at Victoria's designer dress, her perfect hair, her manicured nails. And was it worth it? Victoria's hand shook as she reached for her martini. She drained it in one gulp, then stood abruptly. Stay away from me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Stay away from Aurelia, from anywhere I might be. In return, I'll leave you and your family alone. That's the best I can offer." "That's not enough," Elena said. "Marcus, Thomas, Chef, Laurent, all the people you've terrorized. They deserve better. I can't just change overnight. I can't just become someone else." "You already did it once," Elena pointed out. "The difference is, this time you could become someone better instead of worse." Victoria stared at her for a long moment, and Elena could see the war playing out behind those pale eyes, Hannah Gale fighting to surface through 15 years of Victoria Kane's armor. Then, without another word, Victoria turned and walked away, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown to something Elena couldn't predict. The weeks following that confrontation at the St. Regis bar passed in a strange suspension, like the eye of a hurricane where everything seems calm, but destruction lurks at the edges. Elena had found work at a small cafe downtown, far from the glittering towers of the Upper East Side, serving coffee to office workers who barely looked up from their phones long enough to acknowledge her existence. The pay was a fraction of what Aurelia had offered, and she'd had to take a second job cleaning offices at night to make ends meet. Her brother Carlos called one evening while she was between shifts, his voice bright with excitement about his upcoming residency interviews. Elena listened to him talk about his dreams of becoming a surgeon, about helping people, about making their parents proud, and she felt the weight of her secret pressing against her chest. She'd protected him from Victoria's threats, but at what cost? Every day she remained silent was another day Victoria Kane continued her reign of terror over others who couldn't fight back. Marcus texted her occasionally careful messages that spoke volumes in what they didn't say. "Hope you're well. Things are quiet here. Take care of yourself." She knew he was warning her that Victoria was still watching, still dangerous. Still, Victoria Kane, despite that moment of vulnerability, when Hannah Gale had briefly surfaced. It was a Thursday evening, the rain falling in sheets that turned the city into an impressionist painting of blurred lights and shadows when everything changed. Elena was wiping down tables at the cafe, preparing to close, when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, ready to tell whoever it was that they were closing, and froze. Edward Kane stood in the doorway, water dripping from his $1,000 coat, his gray eyes finding her immediately. "Miss Morales," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "We need to talk." Elena's hand tightened on the cloth she was holding, her mind racing through possibilities. Had Victoria sent him? Was this a threat? She glanced toward the back exit, calculating whether she could reach it before he could stop her. "I'm not here to hurt you," Edward said, apparently reading her thoughts. "I'm here because my wife has been different since your conversation, and I want to know what you said to her." "I don't know what you're talking about," Elena replied carefully. Edward laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Please, Victoria doesn't sleep anymore. She stares at old photos she thinks I don't know she kept. She's dismissed 3 household staff members for minor infractions instead of destroying their careers. She actually apologized to someone yesterday. Victoria Kane doesn't apologize. So I'll ask again, what did you say to her?" Elena studied him, this man who'd built an empire on the ruins of others, who'd turned her father's dreams to ash without a second thought. He looked older up close, the lines around his eyes deeper, his carefully styled hair showing gray at the temples that his colorist had missed. "I reminded her that she used to be human," Elena said finally. Edward's eyes sharpened. "Used to be, interesting choice of words." He moved closer, and Elena could smell his cologne, something expensive and cold, like money itself had been distilled into fragrance. "You know about Hannah?" It wasn't a question. Elena said nothing, but her silence was confirmation enough. "I always wondered if anyone would figure it out." Edward continued, settling into one of the cafe's worn chairs as if it were his boardroom throne. The transformation was so complete, so thorough. Even I sometimes forget the frightened little accountant she used to be. You mean the accountant you threatened into perjuring herself? Edward's smile was razor sharp. Threatened, I offered her a choice. She made it. And then she made another choice to become someone I could never threaten again. You have to admire the ambition. I admire nothing about either of you, Elena said flatly. You destroyed my father. You've destroyed hundreds of people. And for what more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes? For power, Edward corrected. Money is just the scorecard. Power is the game. And Victoria learned to play it better than anyone. Until you, apparently. A waitress with a grudge and some internet research skills has accomplished what corporate rivals and federal investigators couldn't. You've made Victoria Kane vulnerable. She was always vulnerable. She just hid it behind cruelty. And now she's hiding it behind something else, Edward said, his expression thoughtful. She's been visiting a therapist. Victoria Kane in therapy. Can you imagine? She thinks I don't know, but I know everything that happens in her life. It's part of our arrangement. Your arrangement. Our marriage, Miss Morales, is a business contract. She keeps my secrets, I keep hers. She plays the perfect wife, I give her the power she craved. It's worked perfectly for 15 years. But now, he trailed off, staring at the rain streaming down the windows. Now she's remembering she's human. Now she's becoming unpredictable, Edward corrected. And in my world, unpredictability is dangerous. The charity gala is next week, the Starlight Gala, the social event of the year. 500 of the most powerful people in the city, all watching, all judging. If Victoria can't maintain her role, maybe she doesn't want to maintain it anymore. Edward laughed again, that cold, humorless sound. Want has nothing to do with it. She is Victoria Kane. She ceased to be Hannah Gale the moment she put on that wedding ring. There's no going back. There's always a choice, Elena insisted. You're young, Edward said, standing. You still believe in redemption, in second chances. You'll learn. The world doesn't offer redemption, it offers survival or destruction. Victoria chose survival. The question is, what will you choose? He pulled out a checkbook, an actual checkbook, as if he were a relic from another era. How much to make you disappear? 100,000, 200, name your price. I don't want your money. Everyone wants money, Edward said, his pen poised over the check. 500,000, enough to pay for your brother's medical school, your mother's medical bills, a fresh start somewhere far from here. Elena stared at the checkbook, thinking of all the problems that money could solve. Carlos wouldn't have to take out more loans. Her mother could get the experimental treatment her insurance wouldn't cover. She could return to her art create without the constant pressure of survival. No, she said quietly. Edward's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. I'm offering you a gift. Next time I won't be so generous. Is that a threat? It's a fact, Edward said, putting away the checkbook. Victoria isn't the only one who knows how to destroy lives, Miss Morales. I taught her everything she knows, but I didn't teach her everything I know. He walked to the door, then paused. The gala is next Saturday. Victoria will be there playing her role as always. Whatever fantasy you have of her changing, of her becoming someone better, forget it. She is what I made her, what she made herself. And that's all she'll ever be. After he left, Elena stood in the empty cafe, her hands shaking, not with fear, but with rage. Edward Kane spoke of his wife like she was property, a creation he'd molded and could control. But Elena had seen something in Victoria's eyes at the bar. A flicker of the woman she'd been might still be underneath all that armor. She pulled out her phone and did something impulsive, probably stupid. She sent a text to the number Victoria had called her from weeks ago. "He came to see me. He's afraid of you changing. Maybe that means you should." There was no response. The next morning, Elena was awakened by her phone ringing. It was Marcus, his voice tense with excitement and fear. "You need to see this," he said. "Check the Times Society page." Elena pulled up the article on her phone and her breath caught. There was a photo of Victoria at some charity function, but she looked different. Her smile seemed less predatory, more uncertain. And the article: "Victoria Kane donates $5 million to Restaurant Workers Support Fund," the headline read. The article went on to describe how Victoria had announced the creation of a fund to support restaurant workers facing financial hardship with an initial donation of $5 million of her personal money. "She also came to Aurelia yesterday," Marcus continued. "Apologized to Chef Laurent. Actually apologized. Said she'd been under stress and took it out on the staff. Chef nearly fainted. Hell, I nearly fainted." Elena read the article again, looking for the catch, the angle, the manipulation. But it seemed genuine, or as genuine as anything involving Victoria Kane could be. "There's more," Marcus said. "She's requested you specifically for the Starlight Gala. She wants you to be her personal server for the evening. Elena, you can't. It's got to be a trap." But Elena was thinking of Edward's visit, his certainty that Victoria couldn't change his fear that she might. "When's the gala?" "Saturday. But Elena, I'll do it." "Are you insane after everything she's done to you?" "Maybe," Elena admitted. "But I need to see this through." Marcus sighed heavily. "The manager says if you're willing, you can have your job back for the event. Triple pay for the night plus tips. But Elena, please be careful. Victoria Kane might be acting different, but she's still Victoria Kane." Elena spent the next week preparing, though she wasn't sure what she was preparing for. She researched the Starlight Gala, learning it was the crown jewel of New York's social calendar, where deals worth billions were made over champagne and careers were launched or destroyed with a whispered word. This year's theme was metamorphosis, which seemed ironically appropriate. She also researched more about Hannah Gale, digging deeper into the woman Victoria had been. She found a college professor who remembered Hannah describing her as brilliant but haunted, like she was carrying weight too heavy for her years. A high school friend tracked down through social media said Hannah had always dreamed of using her accounting degree to help nonprofits manage their finances better. The morning of the gala, a package arrived at Elena's apartment. Inside was a dress, not elaborate, but exquisitely made, the kind of understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted its value. The note attached said simply, "For tonight, not a uniform, a choice. V." Elena stared at the dress, understanding the message. Victoria wasn't asking her to come as a server. She was asking her to come as herself, as Elena Morales, the woman who'd seen through Victoria Kane to Hannah Gale underneath. That evening, Elena stood before her mirror, the dress fitting perfectly. Of course, Victoria would know. Her measurements probably knew everything about her by now. She looked like she belonged in that glittering world, but she knew better. She would never belong there, and perhaps that was her strength. She could see it clearly, because she stood outside it. The Starlight Gala was held at the Rainbow Room, 65 floors above Manhattan, where the city spread out like a constellation of ambitions and dreams. Elena arrived to find the venue transformed into a wonderland of silver and gold, with butterflies, real butterflies, floating through the air like living metaphors for the evening's theme. She spotted Victoria immediately standing near the windows, in a gown that seemed to be made of liquid silver, her platinum hair swept up to reveal the elegant line of her neck. But it was her expression that stopped Elena. Gone was the mask of cold perfection. Victoria looked uncertain, almost fragile, her pale eyes scanning the crowd like she was looking for an anchor. Their eyes met across the room, and Victoria's face transformed with something that might have been relief. She excused herself from the group of people surrounding her and glided over to Elena, every eye in the room following her movement. "You came," Victoria said softly. "You asked me to. I didn't think you would. After everything." Victoria trailed off, then seemed to gather herself. "I need to tell you something. About your father." Elena's breath caught. "Not here." "Yes, here," Victoria interrupted. "With witnesses, with everyone watching." She took a deep breath, and Elena realized Victoria's hands were trembling. "I was the one who prepared the documents that destroyed your father's company. I knew they were fraudulent, knew the environmental violations we accused him of were fabricated. I did it anyway because Edward wanted that land, and I always gave Edward what he wanted." People nearby had gone quiet, straining to hear this unexpected confession from the woman they'd all feared. "Victoria." Edward's voice cut through the growing silence like a blade. He materialized beside them, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You're tired. Perhaps you should rest." "I'm not tired," Victoria said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm awake. For the first time in 15 years, I'm awake." She turned back to Elena. "I can't bring your father back. I can't undo what I did. But I can tell the truth. Finally." "Stop," Edward commanded, his hand closing around Victoria's arm. "Think about what you're doing. Think about what you're throwing away." "I'm thinking about what I've already thrown away," Victoria replied, pulling her arm free. "My soul, my humanity, the person I could have been if I hadn't been so afraid." The room had gone completely silent, now everyone watching this drama unfold. Elena could see photographers raising their cameras, society reporters typing furiously on their phones. This would be front-page news tomorrow. Victoria Kane's public breakdown, or breakthrough, depending on how you looked at it. "You want to destroy yourself?" Edward's voice was low, dangerous. "Fine. But you won't take me with you. Remember, my dear wife, I know all your secrets too, including the real ones." Victoria went pale but stood her ground. "Then tell them. Tell everyone what Hannah Gale did. Tell them how you threatened a 23-year-old girl into perjury, how you showed her photos of people who'd had accidents when they opposed you. Tell them how you created Victoria Kane because you needed someone as ruthless as you to help run your empire." Edward's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You're nothing without me. Nothing." "I know," Victoria said simply, "but maybe nothing is better than this." She turned to address the room, her voice carrying to every corner. "My name isn't Victoria Kane. It's Hannah Gale. 15 years ago, I helped Edward Kane avoid federal prosecution by lying under oath. I've spent every day since then living that lie, becoming someone monstrous, because I thought it was the only way to survive. I was wrong." The room erupted, people gasping, phones appearing. The butterflies disturbed by the sudden noise swirling in chaotic patterns overhead. But Victoria wasn't done. The Riverside development, the Hartman acquisition, the Brennan bankruptcy, I have documents proving fraud in all of them. I've sent copies to the FBI, the SEC, and the New York Times. I'm prepared to testify to everything I know, everything I've done. She looked at Edward, whose face had gone from red to ashen. "Everything we've done." "You're destroying yourself," Edward said, his voice barely a whisper. "No," Victoria Hannah said, "I'm finally free." Security guards were moving through the crowd now, whether to protect Victoria or arrest her. Elena couldn't tell. But Victoria had one more thing to say. "Elena Morales," she called out, and Elena found herself the focus of 500 pairs of eyes. "Your father was a good man, an honest man. We destroyed him because he wouldn't be bought, wouldn't be threatened, wouldn't compromise his integrity. I'm sorry. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But I'm sorry." Then chaos truly erupted. Edward was shouting for his lawyers, reporters were pushing forward, trying to get to Victoria, and security was trying to maintain some semblance of order. In the middle of it all, Victoria stood perfectly still, tears streaming down her face, washing away 15 years of perfectly applied makeup. Elena pushed through the crowd to reach her. Up close, she could see Victoria was shaking the weight of what she'd just done hitting her. "Why?" Elena asked. "Because you were right," Victoria whispered. "Hannah Gale might have been powerless, but she was real, and I realized I'd rather be real and destroyed than fake and protected." The police arrived then, whether called by Edward or someone else Elena didn't know. Victoria went with them willingly, her silver gown catching the light as she walked, making her look like one of the butterflies that filled the room, transformed, fragile, and finally free. Elena watched her go, feeling a complex mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. Satisfaction that justice might finally be served, pity for the frightened girl who'd made terrible choices. Respect for the courage it had taken to stand up there and confess everything. "You did this," a voice said beside her. She turned to find Edward Kane, his composed mask finally cracked, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. "You turned her against me." "No," Elena said. "I just reminded her she had a choice. She turned herself against you." "You have no idea what you've done," Edward snarled. "The people I work with, the people who depend on my empire. You've endangered all of them. And for what? Some misguided sense of justice. Your father is still dead. This won't bring him back." "No," Elena agreed. "But maybe it'll prevent other fathers from suffering the same fate." Edward leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "This isn't over. Victoria might have destroyed herself, but I'll survive this. I always survive. And when I do, I'll remember you, Elena Morales. I'll remember what you cost me." Then he was gone, pushing through the crowd toward the exit, his lawyers flanking him like bodyguards. Elena stood alone in the middle of the chaos, watching butterflies circle overhead, their wings catching the light like fragments of a shattered mirror. Marcus appeared beside her, his face shocked. "What just happened?" "I think," Elena said slowly, "Victoria Kane just died, and Hannah Gale was reborn." The next few hours passed in a blur. Elena gave statements to the police, the FBI agents who arrived with surprising speed, and what seemed like every reporter in New York. She told them about her conversations with Victoria, about discovering Hannah Gale's identity, about Edward's threats. She held nothing back, knowing that transparency was her only protection now. It was nearly dawn when she finally left the Rainbow Room, the city below starting to wake up to a new day and a scandal that would dominate headlines for weeks. As she waited for the elevator, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you," it read, "for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for believing someone like me could change. They're taking me to federal custody now. I'll probably go to prison. But for the first time in 15 years, I can breathe. H." Elena stared at the message, then typed back. "Hannah Gale was worth saving. I'm glad she survived." The response came quickly. She almost didn't. But someone reminded her that people can choose to be better. even monsters. Elena smiled sadly as the elevator arrived. She didn't know what would happen next to Hannah, to Edward, to herself. But as she descended from that glittering tower back to the real world, she thought about transformation, about metamorphosis, about the butterflies that had filled the gala like souls set free. Change was never easy. It required destroying who you were to become who you might be. Victoria Kane had built herself on a foundation of fear and lies, and that structure had finally collapsed. But maybe, just maybe, Hannah Gale could build something better from the ruins. The sun was rising as Elena walked home through the quiet streets, painting the city in shades of gold and possibility. Her phone rang. Carlos, probably having seen the news. "Elena, are you okay? The news is saying you exposed some massive fraud scandal." "I'm okay," she assured him. "I'll explain everything later." But Carlos' dad would have been proud. There was a pause, then Carlos said softly, "He would have been proud of you anyway, sis. You didn't need to take down a corporate empire to prove that." After they hung up, Elena continued walking, thinking about her father, about justice, about the strange path that had led her from serving champagne to exposing one of New York's biggest scandals. She thought about Victoria Hannah facing the consequences of her choices, finally free of the prison she'd built for herself, even as she faced a literal one. 3 weeks later, Elena received a letter forwarded through Hannah's lawyer. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Hannah's precise handwriting. "Elena, they tell me I'll likely get 5 to 7 years less with cooperation. Edward's looking at 20 to life. Turns out I didn't know half of what he was involved in. But I'm cooperating fully, naming names, providing documents. It's terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I've been thinking about your father, about all the fathers and mothers and children whose lives we destroyed in our pursuit of power. I can't undo any of it. But I can try to balance the scales a little. My lawyer is setting up a fund, the Elena Morales Foundation, to provide legal support for small businesses facing corporate harassment. It's funded with everything I have left, everything I can legally give away. It's not enough, but it's a start. You asked me once if becoming Victoria Kane was worth it. The answer is no. Nothing is worth losing yourself so completely that you forget you ever existed as anything else. But you also showed me something I'd forgotten, that it's never too late to remember who you were, who you could still be. I'm learning to be Hannah again. It's harder than becoming Victoria ever was. Victoria knew exactly who she was supposed to be, cold, perfect, untouchable. Hannah is messier, uncertain, human. But she's real, and that's something. Thank you for seeing her when everyone else only saw the monster. Hannah. P.S. Edward's divorce lawyer contacted me yesterday. Apparently he's claiming I was mentally unstable, that my confession was a delusion. He might be right about the unstable part. After all, what sane person gives up everything for the truth? But then again, what sane person lives a lie for 15 years? Perhaps sanity is overrated. Elena read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in the box where she kept important things: her father's watch, her parents' wedding photo, the first sketch she'd ever sold. Artifacts of a life lived, lost, and continuing despite everything. She returned to her art, using the story of Victoria and Hannah as inspiration for a series of paintings about identity transformation and the masks we wear. The first piece, titled Metamorphosis, showed a woman in a silver gown dissolving into butterflies, each one carrying away a piece of the facade, until only the true person remained underneath, smaller, frailer, but undeniably real. The painting sold to an anonymous buyer for more than Elena had made in 5 years of working. When she went to deliver it to the shipping address, she found herself at a minimum security federal prison in Connecticut. Hannah was waiting in the visiting room wearing prison blues that somehow made her look younger, more like the 23-year-old girl who'd made a terrible choice. "I thought you might not come," Hannah said. "I wanted to see how you were doing." "I'm adjusting. It's strange. I spent 15 years in a prison of my own making, and now I'm in an actual prison, but I feel freer than I have since I was 23. She gestured at the painting Elena had brought. "Is this how you saw it? The transformation?" "It's how I saw you," Elena corrected. "Breaking free." They talked for the full hour aloud about the trial. Edward's was still ongoing, but not looking good for him about the other victims coming forward now that the Kanes' power was broken about the future. "What will you do when you get out?" Elena asked. Hannah smiled, and it was nothing like Victoria's calculating smirk. It was uncertain, but genuine. "I don't know. Isn't that wonderful? For the first time in 15 years, I don't have every move planned, every word calculated. I might teach accounting to kids from backgrounds like mine, show them they don't have to compromise their integrity to succeed. Or maybe I'll do something completely different. I have time to figure it out." As Elena left the prison, she thought about second chances, about redemption, about the courage it took to destroy yourself, to save yourself. Hannah Gale had that courage, had always had it buried under years of fear and ambition. It had just taken someone believing she could change to help her remember it. 6 months later, Edward Kane was convicted on 43 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. The judge, in his sentencing statement, particularly noted the testimony of Hannah Gale as crucial to the conviction. Edward was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. His empire dismantled, his assets seized. Elena watched the news coverage from her new studio, a space she'd been able to rent thanks to the success of her Metamorphosis series. She thought about that night at Aurelia when Victoria Kane had tried to break her with casual cruelty, never imagining that the nobody waitress would be the catalyst for her transformation. Her phone rang. It was Hannah calling from prison. "Did you see?" Hannah asked. "I saw. How do you feel?" There was a long pause. Like Hannah Gale finally got justice for what Edward Kane did to her. And like Victoria Kane got what she deserved for helping him. It's complicated. "Most things are," Elena agreed. "I have something to tell you," Hannah said. "I've been accepted into a program here teaching financial literacy to other inmates. It's not much, but it's a start. Teaching people how to manage money without losing themselves to it." "That's wonderful, Hannah." "I also wanted to say, I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry about your father. I'm sorry about all of them. I can't undo it, but I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends." "I know," Elena said softly. "I forgave you the night of the gala when you stood up there and told the truth. That took more courage than I can imagine." "It took desperation," Hannah corrected, "and someone showing me that I didn't have to be the monster I'd become. You saved my life, Elena. Not from death, but from something worse, living as someone I hated." After they hung up, Elena stood in her studio surrounded by canvases depicting transformation, redemption, the long journey from darkness to light. She thought about her father, who died believing that integrity meant more than success. She thought about Hannah, who'd learned that lesson too late, but not too late to matter. Outside her window, New York City sprawled in all its complicated glory, a place where dreams died and were reborn, where people reinvented themselves daily, where sometimes, just sometimes, the truth prevailed over power. Elena picked up her brush and began a new painting. This one would be different from the others, not about masks or metamorphosis, but about something simpler and more profound. It would be about choice. The choice to be cruel or kind, to lie or tell the truth, to remain trapped or break free. In the end, that's all any of them had, the choice to be better than they were, even when it cost everything. The painting Elena had started that day remained unfinished for 3 months, standing in the corner of her studio like a question she wasn't ready to answer. Every time she approached it with her brush, she found herself thinking about choices, not just Hannah's or her own, but all the small decisions that had led them to that moment at the Starlight Gala, when everything changed. It was a cold December morning when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Elena almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Miss Morales, this is James Whitfield from Whitfield Carson and Associates. I'm representing Hannah Gale in several civil matters. She's asked me to contact you regarding an urgent situation." Elena's stomach tightened. "Is she okay?" "She's concerned. There's been a development. Someone has been visiting Edward Kane in prison, someone from his past who might pose a threat to both Hannah and yourself. She wanted to warn you." "Who?" "A woman named Sophia Brennan. Does that name mean anything to you?" Elena's mind raced through the names she'd researched. Brennan Industries, Edward destroyed them 5 years ago. The owner committed suicide. Richard Brennan, yes. Sophia is his daughter. She's been visiting Edward regularly, and Hannah believes they're planning something. She wanted you to be careful. After the call ended, Elena couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She'd thought the story was over, Edward in prison, Hannah finding redemption, justice served. But real life didn't wrap up neatly like a story. There were always loose threads, consequences that rippled outward in unexpected ways. She researched Sophia Brennan and found a ghost, minimal social media presence. No recent photos, just traces of a woman who'd seemingly vanished after her father's death. The last article about her was from the funeral, describing a grieving daughter who'd had to be sedated after collapsing at the graveside. 3 days later, Elena was leaving her studio late at night when she noticed someone following her. The woman stayed half a block behind, matching Elena's pace perfectly. When Elena stopped at a bodega pretending to window shop, the woman stopped too, lighting a cigarette with studied casualness. Elena's heart raced as she pulled out her phone ready to call 911 when the woman approached. "Don't," she said, and Elena recognized something in her voice, the same desperate edge she'd heard in Hannah's voice that night at the St. Regis bar. "I just want to talk." "Sophia Brennan." The woman nodded. She was younger than Elena had expected, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back severely, and eyes that held a grief so profound it seemed to have carved hollows in her face. "You destroyed them," Sophia said without preamble. "Both of them. The monsters who killed my father." "I didn't." "You did," Sophia interrupted. "I've read everything, watched every news report. You're the one who got through to Victoria, made her grow a conscience. You're the catalyst that brought them down." Elena wasn't sure if this was an accusation or acknowledgement. "Your father, I'm sorry for what happened to him." Sophia laughed bitterly. "Everyone's sorry. Edward was sorry when he offered to buy my father's company for pennies on the dollar after destroying it. Victoria was sorry when she sent flowers to the funeral. Sorry doesn't bring him back." "What do you want?" "I wanted revenge," Sophia said, taking a long drag from her cigarette. "For 5 years, that's all that kept me going, planning how I'd destroy them the way they destroyed him. I learned everything about them, their habits, their weaknesses, their fears. Did you know Victoria was terrified of butterflies before she trained herself to tolerate them? Or that Edward can't sleep without checking his offshore accounts 3 times? Elena said nothing, sensing there was more. "I was going to kill them," Sophia continued matter-of-factly. "I had it all planned. Make it look like Victoria snapped and killed Edward in a rage, then killed herself out of guilt. Poetic justice for two people who'd driven so many to suicide. But you didn't. No. Because you got there first in a different way. You didn't destroy their bodies, you destroyed their souls, their carefully constructed identities. That's so much worse than death, isn't it? Having to live with the truth of what you are. They stood in silence for a moment. Two women connected by the wake of destruction the Kanes had left behind. "I've been visiting Edward," Sophia admitted. "At first I wanted to torment him to make his imprisonment worse. But you know what I found? A broken old man who spends his days writing appeals nobody will read, and letters to Victoria that she returns unopened. He's nothing now, not worth my hatred. And Hannah? Hannah Gale isn't Victoria Kane," Sophia said. "I've researched her too, the real her. Just another victim who became a victimizer to survive. My father would have pitied her. He sounds like he was a good man. He was. Too good for the world Edward Kane built." Sophia dropped her cigarette, grinding it under her heel. "I wanted you to know I'm leaving. Leaving New York, leaving this whole poison city. I've spent 5 years living for revenge, and now that it's happened without me, I don't know who I am anymore." "I understand that feeling," Elena said quietly. Sophia studied her. "You really did it for your father, didn't you? Not for money or fame or power, just justice." "I did it because someone had to. Because Hannah needed to remember she was human. Because the truth mattered more than the consequences." "The consequences," Sophia repeated. "Do you ever think about all the security guards, assistants, accountants who lost their jobs when Kane Enterprises collapsed? The investors who lost their savings? The families destroyed by the fallout?" Elena had thought about it, had lost sleep over it. Every day. But that damage was already done, it was just hidden. The collapse didn't create victims, it revealed them. Sophia nodded slowly. "I suppose that's one way to look at it." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Be careful, Elena Morales. Edward still has friends, people who lost everything when he fell. They blame you, not him. Watch your back." Then she was gone, disappearing into the city night like smoke. Elena stood there for a long moment processing this encounter, before hurrying home, checking over her shoulder more than once. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to her studio. Thomas, the bartender from Aurelia, stood at her door with a bouquet of flowers and an embarrassed smile. "These aren't from me," he said quickly. "I'm just the messenger. They're from the staff at Aurelia, what's left of us anyway. We wanted to thank you." "Thank me. The restaurant nearly closed because of the scandal." But it didn't. New management came in, cleaned house, started fresh. And you know what? It's better now. The new owners actually care about the staff, treat us like humans. Marcus is the head server now, and Chef Laurent can actually cook what he wants instead of catering to tyrants. He paused. "We all knew something was rotten there, but we were too scared to do anything. You weren't." After Thomas left, Elena read the card attached to the flowers. It was signed by dozens of names, people she'd worked with for only a few days, but who remembered her as the one who'd stood up to Victoria Kane and lived to tell about it. That afternoon, she received a call from Hannah's lawyer again. This time, he had a different kind of news. "Hannah's being released early," he said. "Good behavior cooperation with federal prosecutors, and the judge took into account her testimony against Edward. She'll be out in 2 weeks, but there are conditions. She needs a sponsor, someone willing to take responsibility for her integration back into society. She's asked if you would consider it." Elena was speechless. "She wants me to be her sponsor." She says you're the only person who sees her as Hannah, not Victoria. She understands if you refuse, she knows it's a lot to ask. It was more than a lot. It was taking responsibility for someone who'd helped destroy her father, someone who'd spent years terrorizing innocent people. But it was also helping someone who'd found the courage to destroy herself to become someone better. "I'll do it," Elena heard herself say. The 2 weeks passed quickly. Elena prepared for Hannah's release by cleaning out the small spare room in her apartment, buying basic clothes from thrift stores. Hannah's designer wardrobe had been seized as assets, and trying to imagine what it would be like to live with someone who'd been both monster and victim destroyer and destroyed. The day of the release, Elena drove to the facility in a borrowed car, her hands trembling on the wheel. She found Hannah waiting in the release area, holding a small bag of possessions, looking lost in clothes that didn't fit quite right. "You came," Hannah said, and Elena heard echoes of Victoria saying the same words at the gala, but softer now, more vulnerable. "I said I would." The drive back to the city was quiet at first, Hannah staring out the window like she was seeing the world for the first time. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know how to be normal. I haven't been normal since I was 23. I don't know how to shop for groceries or take the subway or have a conversation that isn't about power and manipulation." "You'll learn," Elena said. "Everyone has to learn how to be human. Some just have to learn it more than once." Hannah was quiet for a moment. "The other inmates, they knew who I was. Some hated me for what Victoria Kane had done to their families. Others respected me for bringing down Edward. But there was this one woman, Maria, who just saw me as Hannah. She taught me to play cards, shared her commissary when mine ran out, treated me like a person. I haven't had a real friend since college." "What happened to Maria?" "She was released 3 months ago. Got a job at a bakery in Queens. She writes, sometimes tells me about her grandchildren, her new apartment. Normal things. Beautiful, normal things." Elena glanced at Hannah, seeing tears on her cheeks. "You can have that too. Normal things." "Can I?" "I'm 41 years old, Elena. I have no real job skills that don't involve fraud. No references that aren't in prison or dead. No identity that isn't tainted by who I was." "You have skills," Elena corrected. "You're brilliant with numbers, organized, determined. You just need to learn to use those skills differently." They arrived at Elena's apartment building, a walk-up in Brooklyn, that was a universe away from the penthouses and luxury hotels Victoria Kane had inhabited. Hannah stood on the sidewalk looking up at the building like it was a mountain to climb. 5 flights, Elena warned. No elevator. "I used to run marathons," Hannah said. "Before, when I was trying to exhaust myself enough to sleep without nightmares." She picked up her bag. 5 flights is nothing." The apartment was small but warm, filled with Elena's paintings and the comfortable clutter of a lived-in space. Hannah stood in the doorway, seeming afraid to enter. "This is your room," Elena said, showing her the spare room. "It's not much. It's perfect," Hannah interrupted. "It's real. Everything in my old life was for show, designed to impress or intimidate. This is just a room. A normal room for a normal person." That first night, Elena woke to sounds from the kitchen. She found Hannah sitting at the table, staring at a glass of water, like it held answers. "Couldn't sleep. I kept waiting for someone to tell me when to wake up, when to eat, when to exist," Hannah said. "Freedom is terrifying when you've lived in cages, even gilded ones, for so long." Elena made tea, and they sat together in the quiet kitchen, 2 women who'd been on opposite sides of a war that had destroyed both their families in different ways. "I dream about them sometimes," Hannah said quietly. "All the people Victoria hurt. They stand around my bed just watching. Not angry, just disappointed. Your father is there sometimes. What does he say? Nothing. He just looks at me with these sad eyes like he's wondering how I became what I became. Hannah wrapped her hands around her mug. I wonder that too. Fear, Elena said simply. You became what you became out of fear. And greed. Don't forget greed. I wanted the power, the money, the ability to never be vulnerable again. But mostly fear. Hannah nodded slowly. Edward knew exactly what buttons to push. He'd done his research on me, the poverty, the sick mother I couldn't afford to help the student loans crushing me. He offered me a way out, and I took it. But the price? The price was yourself. Yes, and I paid it willingly. That's what I can't forgive myself for, that I chose it. They sat in silence until dawn, watching the city wake up outside the window. Finally, Hannah spoke again. Why did you agree to sponsor me, really? Elena had been asking herself the same question. Because I believe in second chances. Because my father would have. Because holding on to hatred would make me more like Victoria than like the person I want to be. I don't deserve your forgiveness. It's not about deserving, Elena said. It's about choosing to move forward instead of staying trapped in the past. The first week was hard. Hannah had panic attacks in grocery stores, overwhelmed by having to make simple choices without calculating their impact on her image. She stood in front of the cereal aisle for 20 minutes, paralyzed by the freedom to choose based on what she wanted, rather than what Victoria Kane would eat. Elena found her crying in the bathroom one morning, scissors in hand, her platinum hair scattered on the floor. I couldn't stand looking at her anymore, Hannah said, gesturing at the mirror. Every time I saw that hair, I saw Victoria. Elena helped her even out the choppy cut, and when they were done, Hannah looked younger, softer, more like the frightened girl in those old photos, but with eyes that had seen too much to ever be that innocent again. Finding work proved nearly impossible. Hannah's name was poison in the financial sector, and her lack of any other experience made her unemployable in most fields. After dozens of rejections, she finally found a position at a non-profit that helped elderly people manage their finances, protecting them from scams and predatory lending. They only hired me because the director's mother was one of Edward's victims, Hannah told Elena that night. She thinks it's poetic justice making me help the kind of people I used to prey on. Is it? Maybe. Or maybe it's just what I need to remember, that numbers on spreadsheets represent real people with real lives. Slowly, Hannah began building a life. She took the subway instead of town cars, shopped at discount stores instead of boutiques, cooked simple meals instead of dining at five-star restaurants. She joined a support group for ex-convicts, where she was just another person trying to rebuild. But the past wasn't done with them. One evening, 3 months after Hannah's release, Elena came home to find her door ajar, the lock broken. Inside her apartment had been ransacked paintings, slashed furniture overturned and painted on the wall in red, "You destroyed us, now we destroy you." Hannah was at her support group, and Elena called her immediately. "Don't come home, someone's been here." But Hannah was already on her way. She arrived as the police were documenting the damage, her face pale but determined. "This is my fault," she said. "Someone connected to Edward, to our victims, to this whole mess. I brought this to your door." The detective, a tired-looking woman named Rodriguez, took their statements. "Any idea who might have done this?" Elena thought of Sophia Brennan's warning about Edward's friends, about people who'd lost everything. There are a lot of people who might want revenge. "We'll investigate, but without more to go on." Rodriguez shrugged. "Maybe consider staying somewhere else for a while." They spent that night in a hotel, Elena trying to salvage what she could of her damaged paintings, while Hannah made phone calls using old contacts she'd sworn she'd never touch again. "I know who did it," she said finally. "Richard Torrance. He was Edward's biggest investor, lost everything when the company collapsed. His son called me from a bar drunk, bragging about teaching that bitch artist a lesson. We should tell the police." "No," Hannah interrupted. "Let me handle this. Not as Victoria would have, but as Hannah needs to." The next day, Hannah met with Richard Torrance in a coffee shop, while Elena watched from across the street. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Torrance's face cycle through anger, surprise, and finally something like shame. When Hannah left, she was carrying a check. "He'll pay for the damages and leave you alone," Hannah explained. "I told him the truth, that destroying your life wouldn't bring his money back, wouldn't undo his mistakes in trusting Edward. I also told him I had enough evidence of his son's crime to put him in prison, but I'd rather see that money go to rebuilding what was destroyed. You threatened him. I gave him a choice. That's more than Victoria ever did." They used the money to repair the apartment and Elena's studio. Some of the paintings were beyond saving, but Elena found herself not minding as much as she'd expected. They were artifacts of a different time when she'd been driven by anger and grief. Now she wanted to paint something different. "What will you paint now?" Hannah asked one evening, watching Elena prepare a new canvas. "Hope, maybe. Redemption. The possibility of change. Even for people like me. Especially for people like you. You're proof that anyone can change if they choose to." Hannah was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about Edward. He's alone now, truly alone. His lawyers have abandoned him. His friends have disappeared. Even the people who might have stood by him out of fear are gone. Are you feeling sorry for him?" "No, maybe. I don't know." Hannah sighed. "He was a monster, but he was also a man who thought being feared was the same as being respected, who thought power was the only thing that mattered. In the end, what did it get him? 30 years in prison, and a legacy of destruction. When he dies, no one will mourn him. The obituaries will list his crimes, not his accomplishments. Is that what he wanted when he started building his empire?" Elena considered this. "I think he wanted to matter, to be important. He just confused being important with being powerful." "Victoria wanted the same thing," Hannah admitted. "To matter. To never be ignored or dismissed again. I achieved that, but at what cost? The cost was everything. But you're paying a different price now, the price of rebuilding, of becoming human again." 6 months into Hannah's release, they received unexpected news. Edward Kane had been attacked in prison, beaten so badly, he was in critical condition. The attackers were other inmates, whose families had been destroyed by his schemes. Hannah insisted on visiting him. "Why?" Elena asked. "He destroyed you as much as you destroyed yourself." "Because someone should. Because even monsters shouldn't die alone." Elena went with her. They found Edward in the prison hospital, hooked to machines, his face unrecognizable beneath the bruises and bandages. He was conscious, his eyes tracking their movement as they entered. "Come to gloat," he whispered through cracked lips. "Come to witness," Hannah said. "To see what we became, what we did to ourselves and others." Edward tried to laugh, but only managed a wheeze. "We were gods, Victoria. We decided fates, destroyed lives, built empires." "We were fools," Hannah corrected. "We had everything and threw it away for the illusion of power." "It wasn't an illusion. The fear in their eyes, the way they scrambled to please us, that was real." "No," Elena interjected. "That was the illusion. Real power is the ability to help, to build, to create. You two only knew how to destroy." Edward's eyes shifted to her. The waitress. The catalyst. You think you're better than us. I think I'm luckier, Elena said. I learned early that integrity matters more than power. You never learned that lesson. Integrity. Edward spat, though it clearly hurt him. Your father had integrity. Where did it get him? It got him a daughter who loved him enough to seek justice. What did your empire get you, Mr. Kane, who loves you enough to seek justice for you? Edward was silent, his eyes closing. For a moment they thought he'd passed out. But then he spoke so quietly they had to lean in to hear. I don't remember when I became this. I was young once, idealistic. I was going to build things, create jobs, make the world better. Then somewhere along the way, I learned that crushing others was easier than competing fairly. Each time got easier until I couldn't remember any other way to be. There's always another way, Hannah said softly. Not for me. Not anymore. He opened his eyes, looking directly at Hannah. I'm dying. Doctors haven't told me, but I know. Internal bleeding they can't stop. I'll be dead within days. Hannah reached out, almost touching his hand, then pulled back. I'm sorry. Don't be. This is better than 30 years in a cage. He coughed, specks of blood appearing on his lips. You want to know something funny? I have $20 billion in offshore accounts hidden away, and I can't touch a penny of it. All that money, all that power, and I'm dying in a prison hospital bed. The money, Hannah started, will die with me. The accounts need biometric verification. My eyes, my fingerprints. When I die, that money becomes digital waste, forever inaccessible. He actually smiled at this. $20 billion that could have helped thousands, millions maybe, and it'll just sit there useless like my life. They left shortly after Edward sleeping or unconscious, they couldn't tell. In the car, Hannah broke down completely, sobbing in a way Elena had never seen. All those years, all that destruction for nothing. We ruined lives, destroyed families, and for what? To die alone, unloved, unmourned. Elena pulled over, letting Hannah cry herself out. When the sobs finally subsided, she said, But you're not dying alone. You're not unloved. You have friends now, real ones. Maria from prison, the people in your support group, even me. You have a chance Edward never took to make the rest of your life mean something. Edward Kane died 3 days later. The funeral was attended by exactly 4 people his lawyer required to be there, a prison chaplain, Hannah, and Elena. The news barely made the business section, overshadowed by the latest scandal involving another corporate criminal. Standing at the graveside, Hannah said, He was my monster and my creator, my destroyer and my savior. I hated him and depended on him. I don't know how to feel about his death. Feel whatever you need to feel, Elena said. But then let him go. He's had power over you for too long. Hannah nodded, dropping a single rose on the coffin, not out of love, but out of acknowledgement of what they'd been to each other for better and worse. That evening they sat in Elena's apartment, sharing a bottle of wine and trying to process the strange journey that had brought them here. What now? Hannah asked. Edward's dead. I'm free, you have your justice. What comes after the ending? Life, Elena said simply. Regular, ordinary, beautiful life. You keep working at the nonprofit, I keep painting. We keep moving forward. Is it that simple? No, but it's that necessary. Hannah raised her glass. To moving forward, then. To choosing to be better than we were. They clinked glasses, 2 unlikely friends who'd found each other in the wreckage of lives destroyed and rebuilt. Outside New York hummed with its eternal energy, indifferent to their small story of redemption. But they didn't need the city's attention. They had something better. The knowledge that change was possible, that people could choose to be better, that even the worst mistakes didn't have to define a life forever. The morning after Edward's funeral, Hannah woke to find 17 missed calls on her phone. Her hands trembled as she listened to the first voicemail from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. "Ms. Gale, we've received documents suggesting Edward Kane left a sealed deposition to be released upon his death. We'd like your comment on his allegations that you were the true mastermind behind the Kane Empire's criminal activities." Elena found her sitting on the kitchen floor, phone clutched in her hand, face drained of all color. "He's reaching from beyond the grave," Hannah whispered. "Even dead, he's trying to destroy me." Within hours, the story exploded across every major news outlet. Edward's posthumous testimony painted Hannah not as a coerced accomplice, but as the architect of the entire fraud scheme, claiming she'd manipulated him, threatened him, used their marriage as a weapon to control the empire. He'd provided documents forged, Hannah insisted, but convincing enough to raise questions. "It's brilliant," Hannah said, with bitter admiration, reading through the leaked deposition on her laptop. "He must have spent months preparing this, knowing he was dying. Every crime he committed, he's attributed to me. Every victim he created, he's claiming I orchestrated. And I can't defend myself against a dead man." The nonprofit called within hours to suspend her pending investigation. Her support group leader suggested she might want to take a break from meetings. Even Maria, her friend from prison, sent a tentative text asking if any of it was true. Elena watched Hannah crumble in real time, saw her retreating into herself, the progress of months evaporating in hours. She found her standing on the apartment's fire escape that night, staring down at the street 5 floors below. "I'm not going to jump," Hannah said without turning around. "I thought about it, but that would just confirm everyone's suspicions, wouldn't it? Guilty Victoria Kane taking the coward's way out." "You're not Victoria Kane." "Aren't I?" Maybe Edward was right. Maybe Hannah Gale really did die 15 years ago, and all this, she gestured at herself, is just Victoria playing another role. The reformed criminal, the repentant sinner, another performance. Elena stepped onto the fire escape, the metal cold under her bare feet. "I know who you are. You're the woman who stood up at the Starlight Gala and told the truth. You're the woman who teaches elderly people to protect their savings. You're the woman who cried in a grocery store because choosing cereal for yourself was freedom you'd never had. None of that matters if everyone believes Edward. Then we prove he's lying." Hannah laughed bitterly. "How he's dead. The perfect witness can't be cross-examined, can't be challenged. He knew exactly what he was doing." But Elena was already thinking, her mind working through possibilities the way it did when she was planning a painting, seeing the negative space that defined the image. "He made one mistake. He said you masterminded everything, but you were 23 when you started at Kane Enterprises. No one's going to believe a recent graduate manipulated a 40-year-old billionaire. People believe what they want to believe. Then we make them want to believe the truth." The next morning, Elena did something she'd sworn she'd never do. She called Sophia Brennan. The woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious. "I heard about Edward's posthumous performance," Sophia said before Elena could speak. "Let me guess you need help proving it's lies. Hannah doesn't deserve this. Whatever she did, she's paid for it." "Has she?" "My father is still dead. Your father is still dead. All those families are still destroyed. And destroying Hannah won't bring any of them back." There was a long silence. Then Sophia said, "I might have something. When I was planning my revenge, I gathered everything I could on both of them, including recordings." "Recordings?" Edward liked to record his conversations, especially with Victoria. Insurance, he called it. I managed to acquire some from a former security employee. They're not pretty, but they show who really ran that empire. They met in Central Park neutral ground, where Sophia handed over a flash drive with the air of someone handling toxic waste. "There are 12 recordings," she said. Edward threatening Hannah, controlling her, making it clear that he owned her. One from right after their wedding, where he tells her exactly what will happen if she ever tries to leave. She paused. "I listened to them when I was planning their deaths. They made me realize Hannah was as much a victim as a perpetrator. Why didn't you release them before? Because I wanted them both to suffer. But now," Sophia shrugged, "Edward's dead and Hannah's trying to be better. That's more than most of us get a chance to be better." Elena took the recordings to Hannah's lawyer, who listened to them with growing excitement. "This changes everything," he said. "With these, we can prove Edward was lying, that he was the controlling force in the relationship and the crimes." But Hannah, when told about the recordings, had a different reaction. "No," she said firmly, "we don't release them." Elena stared at her in disbelief. "Hannah, these recordings could clear your name. By destroying Edward's last shred of dignity, he's dead, Elena. His legacy is already ruined. These recordings, they show him at his absolute worst, the monster without any mask. Do we really need to parade that before the world? He's trying to destroy you from beyond the grave. And if I destroy him back, what does that make me?" Victoria Kane would have released those recordings in a heartbeat, would have used them to obliterate any threat. But I'm trying not to be her anymore. Elena wanted to shake her. "This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. The truth is that we were both guilty. He was worse, yes, but I made choices too. I could have gone to the FBI instead of marrying him. I could have run instead of staying. I participated in those crimes for 15 years, maybe not as the mastermind, but as a willing accomplice. You were coerced, at first, but after I had power, money, safety, I stayed because I liked it. I liked the fear in people's eyes, the power over their lives. That's the truth. Edward's lies are built on that Victoria Kane was a monster. He's not wrong about that part." They fought about it for days, Elena insisting Hannah deserved to clear her name. Hannah insisting she deserved whatever consequences came. Finally, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She released one recording not to the media, but to a true crime podcast that had been covering the Kane scandal. It was the most damning one, Edward explicitly threatening to kill Hannah if she ever betrayed him, describing in detail how he'd make it look like suicide. The podcast episode went viral within hours. Public opinion, which had been turning against Hannah, swung back dramatically. The narrative shifted from manipulative Black Widow to abuse survivor who fought back. Hannah was furious when she found out. "You had no right," she said, pacing Elena's apartment like a caged animal. "Those weren't your recordings to release. Someone had to protect you even from yourself. I don't need protection. I need to face the consequences of my actions." "You have faced them. You went to prison. You lost everything. You're rebuilding from nothing. How much more punishment do you think you deserve?" Hannah stopped pacing, turning to face Elena with tears streaming down her face. "All of it. I deserve all of it. Do you know what it's like to wake up every morning and remember the people you've hurt, to know that somewhere someone is struggling because of choices you made?" "Yes," Elena said quietly. "I know exactly what that's like, because I wake up every morning and remember that my actions led to hundreds of people losing their jobs when Kane Enterprises collapsed. That my pursuit of justice for my father created other victims. We all carry weight, Hannah. The question is whether we let it crush us or use it to become stronger." Hannah sank onto the couch, the fight leaving her. "I don't know how to live with being both victim and victimizer. It was easier when I was just Victoria, when I could pretend I was only one thing. Life isn't that simple. People aren't that simple. You're both things, someone who was hurt and someone who hurt others. The only choice is what you do with that knowledge. The release of the recording had an unexpected consequence. Other victims of Edward's manipulation began coming forward, former employees, business partners, even his first wife, whom no one had heard from in 20 years. She called Hannah directly, her voice shaky but determined. "I'm Margaret Kane," she said. "Edward's first wife. I've been living under an assumed name in Maine for 2 decades, hiding from him. But now that he's dead, I wanted you to know you weren't the first person he destroyed and remade." They met in person a week later. Margaret driving down from Maine, she still wouldn't fly a remnant of the paranoia Edward had instilled in her. She was in her 60s, gray-haired and soft-spoken, but her eyes held the same haunted look Elena had first seen in Hannah's. "He was charming at first," Margaret said, sitting in Elena's living room while Hannah made tea with shaking hands. "Successful, confident, everything a young woman thinks she wants. The control started small, choosing my clothes, my friends, my thoughts. By the time I realized I was trapped, I was pregnant." "You have a child?" Hannah's voice was shocked. "Had. My daughter died when she was 3. A car accident, they said. But I knew better. She was the only thing I loved more than I feared him, and Edward couldn't tolerate that." Margaret's voice was steady, but tears ran down her cheeks. "That's when I ran. Changed my name, disappeared. Let everyone think I'd had a breakdown." "Why didn't you ever come forward?" Elena asked gently. "With what proof Edward was careful? Everything looked like accidents, coincidences, my own instability. Who would believe me over him?" She looked at Hannah. "You were brave to stand up to him, even if it took 15 years. I wasn't brave. I was cornered." "Sometimes that's the same thing," Margaret said. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." Margaret's story, when she chose to share it publicly, changed the narrative completely. Edward Kane wasn't just a corrupt businessman. He was a serial predator who used wealth and power to destroy women who got too close. Hannah transformed from accomplice to survivor in the public eye, though she struggled to accept that characterization. "I'm not like Margaret," she insisted to Elena. "She was truly innocent. I made choices. You made choices within the context of abuse and coercion." Elena interrupted. "That doesn't absolve you, but it does explain you, and explanation matters." The nonprofit that had suspended Hannah called to offer her position back, but she declined. "I need to do something more," she told Elena. "Something that actually helps the people Victoria Kane hurt." She started her own organization using the money from selling her remaining jewelry pieces that hadn't been seized as criminal assets. The Hannah Gale Foundation provided free financial counseling and legal support to victims of corporate crime. It was small, operating out of a tiny office in Queens, but it was real. Elena painted a new series during this time, portraits of women rebuilding their lives after trauma. She didn't name them, but anyone who looked closely could see Hannah in one painting, Margaret in another, even Sophia Brennan in a third, all women who'd been broken by the Kane empire and were slowly, painfully putting themselves back together. The series was displayed at a gallery in Soho, and opening night brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus stood in front of the painting that was clearly Hannah, though her face was obscured by fragments of light, like she was emerging from darkness. "It's her, isn't it?" he said to Elena. I mean Hannah." "How did you know?" "The hands. She always held her hands like that when she was nervous, even when her face showed nothing." He studied the painting more closely. Is she okay? She's surviving, rebuilding, trying to make amends. Marcus nodded slowly. Tell her Chef Laurent named a dish after her. Not Victoria Kane, the press would crucify him. But there's a special on the menu called Second Chances. It's a deconstructed soufflé that's rebuilt into something entirely different. He says it's about transformation. Elena smiled. I'll tell her. 6 months after Edward's death, Hannah received a call that would test every bit of progress she'd made. It was from a lawyer representing the 5 families whose fathers had committed suicide after Edward destroyed their businesses. They want to meet with you, the lawyer said. Not for legal reasons, the criminal case is closed. They want to understand why, how. They need closure. Hannah was terrified, but she agreed. The meeting was held in a conference room at a neutral location, 5 families facing the woman who'd helped destroy their lives. Elena waited outside, her stomach in knots. For 3 hours, Hannah answered their questions with brutal honesty. She explained the financial manipulations, the forged documents, the systematic destruction of their father's companies. She didn't make excuses or minimize her role. She simply told the truth. When she emerged, she looked hollowed out, but somehow lighter. They didn't forgive me, she told Elena, but they thanked me for the truth. One of them, the Hartman's daughter, she said, knowing how it happened, helped her understand that her father wasn't weak or foolish. He was just facing an enemy he couldn't possibly defeat. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was, but it was also necessary. Victoria Kane never faced her victims, never saw them as real people. Hannah Gale needed to. That night, Elena found Hannah on the fire escape again, but this time she was sitting calmly watching the city lights. I've been thinking about identity, Hannah said, about who we really are underneath all the roles we play. I was Hannah then, Victoria now. I'm trying to be Hannah again, but I'm not the same Hannah I was at 23. Maybe you're both, Elena suggested, sitting beside her. Maybe we're all multiple people, and the challenge is integrating them instead of rejecting parts of ourselves. Can someone integrate a monster? You're not a monster. You were monstrous. There's a difference. Actions can be monstrous without the person being irredeemable. Hannah was quiet for a moment. I got a letter today from one of the inmates I've been corresponding with. She's getting out next month, wants to work at the foundation. She said I gave her hope that people can change. You did. But what if I revert? What if stress or fear or opportunity makes Victoria resurface? Then I'll remind you who you chose to be. That's what friends do. They help us remember our better selves when we're in danger of forgetting. A year after Edward's death, Hannah received notice that his estate, what was left after settlements and seizures, had been distributed according to his will. To everyone's shock, he'd left Hannah a single item, a safety deposit box key, with no indication of which bank or what it contained. It took weeks of legal wrangling to locate the box, and when Hannah finally opened it with Elena beside her for support, they found something unexpected: hundreds of photographs. Hannah and Edward through the years, but also Hannah alone, candid shots taken without her knowledge, documenting 15 years of marriage. In every photo, Hannah's transformation was visible. The frightened young woman at their wedding, gradually morphing into the Ice Queen Victoria, then slowly, in the last few photos taken before Edward's arrest, something else, a woman looking lost, trapped between 2 identities. At the bottom of the box was a letter in Edward's handwriting: Victoria. By the time you read this, I'll be dead, and you'll probably be free. I want you to know that I kept these photos as a reminder of my greatest creation and my greatest failure. I created Victoria Kane, but I could never control her completely. You became something beyond what I intended, stronger, colder, more ruthless than even I could be. I suppose I should hate you for betraying me, but I can't. You did what I taught you to do, survive at any cost. That you survived me is perhaps the greatest testament to how well you learned. The $20 billion I mentioned isn't lost. Account information is hidden in our wedding photo. The one you always hated because you said your smile looked forced. You were right. Everything about us was forced. Do what you want with the money. Build something or destroy something. Become someone new again or stay trapped between Hannah and Victoria forever. I'm past caring. Despite everything, or perhaps because of everything, you're the only person who ever truly knew me. And I'm the only person who truly knew you. That has to count for something, even if that something is horrible. Edward. Hannah stared at the letter, then at their wedding photo. Sure enough, barely visible in the background, were numbers that could be account information. $20 billion, Elena breathed. I could do a lot of things, Hannah interrupted. Victoria would have known exactly what to do with it. Hannah has no idea. They sat with the photos spread between them, a visual history of a woman's destruction and reconstruction. Finally, Hannah gathered them all up and walked to Elena's fireplace. What are you doing? Letting them both go, Victoria and the Hannah, who was too weak to resist becoming her. She lit a match, holding it to the wedding photo. The money can rot in whatever account Edward hid it in. It's blood money built on the bones of people like our fathers. Elena watched the photos burn, years of pain and transformation turning to ash. But she grabbed the account information before it could burn, tucking it into her pocket. Hannah noticed, but said nothing. Later that night, Elena made a decision. She took the account information to the FBI, explaining its source and suggesting they might be able to access it through legal channels for victim restitution. The agent she spoke with, the same one who'd handled the original Kane case, nearly fell off his chair. $20 billion. That could compensate every victim fund financial crime prevention for decades. Then make it happen, Elena said. But leave Hannah out of it. She's been through enough. It took another year of legal proceedings, but eventually, the money was recovered and distributed. Every family the Kanes had destroyed received compensation. The Elena Morales Foundation Hannah had started received enough funding to expand nationally. Programs were established to help prevent future corporate crime. Hannah never asked Elena what happened to the account information, and Elena never told her. But when the news broke about the recovered fortune and its distribution, Hannah looked at her friend with knowing eyes. "You saved me from temptation," she said simply. "You saved yourself. I just helped with the cleanup." They were in Elena's studio where she was working on her largest painting, yet a mural-sized piece showing a woman shattering like glass, each fragment reflecting a different version of herself, but with light shining through the cracks, creating something beautiful from the breakage. "Is that supposed to be me?" Hannah asked. "It's supposed to be all of us. Everyone who's had to break themselves to become something better." Hannah studied it for a long moment. The Japanese have a word, kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making the repaired piece more beautiful than the original. That's what you're doing with your life, taking the broken pieces and making something better. "We're doing," Hannah corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." There was a knock at the studio door. Marcus entered with a woman Elena didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, but not ostentatiously so, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "This is Patricia Chen," Marcus said. "She's the new owner of Aurelia. She wanted to meet both of you." Patricia stepped forward, extending her hand to Hannah first. "I know who you were and I know who you're trying to be. I bought Aurelia because I believe in second chances. My father went to prison when I was young, and when he got out, no one would hire him. He died believing he was worthless. I'm sorry, Hannah said quietly. Don't be sorry. Be better. That's what I'm trying to do with Aurelia, make it better. Marcus tells me you both have history there. I'd like to invite you to our reopening gala. Not as staff, not as guests to be gawked at, but as symbols that change is possible. Elena looked at Hannah, seeing the fear and hope warring in her eyes. We'll think about it, Elena said diplomatically. After Patricia and Marcus left, Hannah sank into a chair. I can't go back there. That's where Victoria was at her worst. That's exactly why you should go. To prove that place has no power over you anymore. What if people recognize me? What if then they see Hannah Gale, who made terrible choices and is trying to make amends? Not Victoria Kane, who never apologized for anything. The reopening was 2 weeks away. Hannah spent the time in intense therapy, working through her fear of returning to the place where she'd wielded cruelty like a weapon. Elena worked on a special piece for the occasion, a small painting of a butterfly emerging from a cocoon that looked suspiciously like a designer dress. The night of the reopening, Hannah stood outside Aurelia for 20 minutes, unable to enter. I destroyed people in there, she whispered. Humiliated them, crushed their dreams, made them feel worthless. And now you help people recover from financial crimes. You've raised millions for victim support. You've testified in 3 cases that put other corporate criminals away. That's who's walking in there tonight, not Victoria Kane, but Hannah Gale, advocate and survivor. They entered together, Hannah gripping Elena's arm so tightly it hurt. The restaurant had been completely transformed. Gone was the cold opulence that had made it a temple to power. In its place was warm elegance, inviting rather than intimidating. Some people recognized Hannah. Elena could see it in their eyes. But instead of the fear Victoria had commanded, there was curiosity, even respect. One woman approached them tentatively. You're Hannah Gale, aren't you? You spoke at my father's sentencing hearing. He was one of Edward's accomplices. You asked for leniency for him, said he was as much a victim as perpetrator. He got 5 years instead of 15 because of you. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. I just told the truth. The truth mattered. He's out now, rebuilding his life. Like you. As the evening progressed, Elena watched Hannah slowly relax, even managing to smile when Chef Laurent came out to greet them, older and grayer, but with the same passionate fire in his eyes. You have changed, he said to Hannah in his thick accent. Before you were ice pretending to be human. Now you are human accepting your flaws. This is better, no. It's harder, Hannah admitted. Of course, being human is always harder than being a monster. Monsters have no conscience to battle. Near the end of the evening, Patricia Chen clinked a glass for attention. Tonight isn't just about reopening a restaurant, she said. It's about transformation. This place was known for its exclusivity, its coldness, its worship of power. But buildings like people can change. Tonight, I want to announce that Aurelia will donate 50% of its profits to organizations supporting victims of white-collar crime, starting with the Hannah Gale Foundation. The applause was genuine warm. Hannah stood frozen, overwhelmed. Elena nudged her forward, and somehow Hannah found herself at the microphone. I don't deserve this, she began, her voice shaky. I was part of the system that created victims. I stood in this very room and wielded cruelty like a weapon. But someone, she looked at Elena, showed me that people can change, that we can choose to be better than we were. This foundation isn't about me earning forgiveness. It's about preventing others from becoming what I was and helping those who were hurt by people like I was. Thank you for the chance to do something good in a place where I did so much harm." The applause this time was thunderous. Elena saw tears on many faces, including Marcus's. Hannah made her way back through the crowd, people reaching out to touch her arm, offer words of support, share their own stories of redemption. They left shortly after, both emotionally exhausted. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the promise of winter. "You did it," Elena said. "You faced the worst place from your past and transformed it into something positive." "We did it," Hannah corrected. "I never would have had the courage alone." They walked in comfortable silence until Hannah spoke again. "I've been thinking about what's next. The foundation is running well, I've made what amends I can, I'm rebuilding. But I feel like there's something more I'm supposed to do." "Like what?" "I've been asked to write a book. About Victoria, about Hannah, about the transformation. A publisher thinks it could help other people trapped in similar situations." Elena considered this. It would mean reliving all of it. But maybe that's necessary. Maybe the story needs to be told not for sensation, but for education. How ordinary people become monsters, and how monsters can become human again. "Will you use your real name?" "Both of them. From Hannah to Victoria, and back, a journey through identity, crime, and redemption by Hannah Gale, formerly Victoria Kane." They reached Elena's apartment building, but Hannah stopped at the entrance. "I've been thinking about something else too. I've been living with you for over a year. You've been incredibly generous, but I think it's time I stood on my own feet completely." Elena felt a pang of loss, but understood. "You found a place?" "A small apartment in Queens near the foundation office. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Or it will be once I sign the lease tomorrow. I'll help you move." "I was hoping you'd say that." Hannah smiled, then grew serious. "Elena, I need you to know something. You saved my life. Not just physically, but spiritually. You saw Hannah when everyone else only saw Victoria. You believed I could change when I didn't believe it myself. I can never repay that." "You don't need to repay it. Just pay it forward. Help someone else remember they're human." Hannah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise." The move to Queens took place on a gray Saturday that threatened rain but never quite delivered, the sky holding its breath like the city itself was waiting for something. Elena helped Hannah carry boxes up 3 flights to the small one-bedroom apartment that would be her first real home in 16 years. Everything else had been either Edward's showcase properties or a prison cell. "It's perfect," Hannah said, standing in the empty living room with its scuffed hardwood floors and windows that faced a brick wall. "It's completely ordinary and absolutely perfect." They spent the day arranging second-hand furniture, hanging curtains, making the space livable. Hannah had bought everything from thrift stores and yard sales, determined to build her new life without touching the blood money that had once defined her existence. As evening fell, they sat on the floor eating Chinese takeout from paper containers, and Elena noticed something different about Hannah's face, a lightness that hadn't been there before. "You look happy," Elena observed. "I am. For the first time since I was 23, I'm just happy. Not powerful, not feared, not even reformed, just happy." Hannah paused with her chopsticks halfway to her mouth. "Is that allowed? After everything I've done, am I allowed to be happy?" "Happiness isn't something you're allowed or forbidden. It's something you choose, just like everything else." That night, Elena left Hannah in her new apartment, and for the first time in over a year, they went to sleep under different roofs. But at 3 in the morning, Elena's phone rang. "There's someone here," Hannah whispered, terror crackling through the line. "Outside my door. They've been standing there for 10 minutes, not knocking, just breathing." Elena was already pulling on clothes. Call 911. I'm on my way. Wait, they're leaving. I can hear footsteps going down the stairs. Hannah's voice shook. But Elena, they left something under the door. Don't touch it. Wait for me. Elena made it to Queens in record time, finding Hannah standing in her doorway, staring at an envelope on the floor, as if it might explode. Together, they opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph, Victoria Kane at her worst, screaming at a cowering server at Aurelia, her face twisted with rage. Written on the back in red ink, "We remember who you really are." It's starting again. Hannah said, her newfound happiness crumbling. The past won't let me go. They called the police, but without any real threat or crime, there was little they could do. The next few days brought more photographs, Victoria destroying someone's career with a phone call, Victoria at Edward's side as they signed documents that would bankrupt another company, Victoria laughing as security dragged a fired employee from the building. Someone documented everything, Hannah said, staring at the growing collection of her past sins. They were watching, recording, waiting. But waiting for what? The answer came a week later in the form of a meeting request from someone named Daniel Morrison. The name meant nothing to either of them. Until they researched him, he was the son of James Morrison, former CFO of a company Edward had destroyed 8 years ago. James had died of a heart attack during the trial that followed. They met in a public park, Daniel insisting on somewhere with witnesses. He was younger than Elena expected, maybe 30, with the kind of exhausted anger that came from carrying hatred too long. "You killed my father," he said to Hannah without preamble. "Not directly, but you might as well have. The stress of the trial, the humiliation, the financial ruin, his heart couldn't take it." "I'm sorry," Hannah said quietly. "I know that's not enough." "You're right, it's not enough." Daniel pulled out a tablet showing them a website he'd created, The Real Victoria Kane, filled with documentation of every cruel thing she'd ever done, every life she'd destroyed, every moment of pain she'd caused. "I've spent 3 years building this, gathering evidence, talking to victims. Did you know there are 47 people who credit Victoria Kane directly with ruining their lives?" Hannah's face had gone white. "What do you want?" "I wanted revenge. I wanted to destroy you the way you destroyed my father. But then you went and destroyed yourself at that gala, and I thought that was enough. But seeing you now walking free, building a new life, being happy." He shook his head. "My father doesn't get to be happy. Neither should you." "So you're going to release this website?" Elena asked. "Unless you convince me not to." He looked at Hannah. "Tell me why you deserve peace when my father is dead." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could see her struggling, the old Victoria instinct to fight warring with Hannah's need for honesty. "I don't deserve peace," Hannah finally said, "but denying it to me won't bring your father back. It won't heal your pain. It'll just create more damage, more anger, more victims." "You sound like you've been in therapy," Daniel said bitterly. "I have. And I've learned that revenge doesn't end pain, it multiplies it. Your website will hurt me, yes, but it'll also hurt the people I'm trying to help now. The elderly victims who come to my foundation for support, the other survivors of corporate crime who see my transformation as hope for their own recovery." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You don't get to be a symbol of hope. You're a symbol of everything wrong with corporate America." "I'm both," Hannah said. "That's why my story matters. Not as inspiration, but as warning. About how easy it is to lose yourself to power and greed, and how hard it is to find your way back." "Pretty words," Daniel said, standing. "You have 1 week to convince me not to publish. 1 week to prove that Hannah Gale deserves to exist more than Victoria Kane deserves to be exposed. After he left, Hannah sat on the park bench staring at nothing. He's right. Victoria Kane should be exposed. Every cruel thing, every destroyed life, it should all be public. That's not who you are anymore. But it's who I was. And maybe that's what needs to be remembered. Hannah stood suddenly, decision crystallizing in her eyes. I'm going to help him. What? I'm going to give him everything, every document, every crime Victoria committed that he doesn't know about. If he's going to tell the story, it should be complete. Elena thought Hannah had lost her mind, but over the next 3 days she watched her gather evidence of her own crimes, with the same meticulous attention she'd once used to commit them. She annotated documents, provided context, even wrote personal statements about her mindset during each cruel act. When she met with Daniel again, she handed him 3 boxes of materials. "What is this?" he asked, suspicious. "The complete truth about Victoria Kane, including things you didn't know, couldn't know. Internal emails where I destroyed people for sport. Recordings of me laughing about ruined lives. The real story of how I helped Edward destroy your father's company, including my suggestion to attack him personally rather than just professionally, because it would be more effective." Daniel stared at her, speechless. "But," Hannah continued, "I have one condition. You include everything, not just Victoria's crimes, but Hannah's transformation. The work the foundation does, the people I've helped, since the testimonies from victims who've found peace through the restorative justice programs I've funded. Show the whole story, not just the part that feeds your anger. Why would you do this? Because your father deserves to have his story told completely. Because the 47 people on your list deserve acknowledgement of their pain. And because I need to stop running from Victoria Kane and start integrating her into who I am now." Daniel spent 2 weeks going through the materials Hannah had provided. During that time, Elena watched Hannah swing between peace and panic, sometimes within the same hour. She threw herself into her foundation work with desperate intensity, as if trying to balance the scales before the website went live. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel called asking to meet again. This time he brought someone with him, a woman in her 50s who looked familiar. "This is my mother," Daniel said. "She wanted to meet you." Mrs. Morrison studied Hannah with eyes that had cried too many tears. "I've read everything Daniel gathered, everything you provided. I've spent 2 weeks immersed in the story of Victoria Kane and Hannah Gale." "I'm sorry about your husband," Hannah said. "I know you are. That's what makes this so complicated." Mrs. Morrison sat down heavily. "I came here ready to hate you, to support my son's revenge. But revenge won't bring James back. And James," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "James wouldn't want his legacy to be more destruction." "Mom," Daniel started, but she held up her hand. "Your father was a good man who got caught in a bad system. Yes, the Kanes destroyed him, but the system that allowed them to exist is the real villain. And you, Ms. Gale, you're trying to change that system now, aren't you?" "I'm trying," Hannah said quietly. Mrs. Morrison nodded. "Then I have a proposition. Instead of a website devoted to revenge, what if we created something else, a memorial to all the victims of corporate crime, including my husband? Their stories, their lives before they were destroyed, who they really were beyond being victims. And yes, include your story too, the complete transformation from perpetrator to advocate." Daniel looked at his mother in shock. "You want to forgive her? I want to honor your father by building something constructive, not destructive. James always said, the best revenge against cruelty is kindness, against destruction is creation." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. I would fund it completely. A proper memorial, a website, even a physical space if you want. Whatever would honor your husband and the others. And it took Daniel another week to decide, a week during which Hannah barely slept, waiting for either redemption or destruction. Elena stayed close, watching her friend wrestle with the weight of her past and the possibility of her future. Finally, Daniel agreed, but with conditions. The memorial would be honest about what Victoria Kane had done, unflinchingly documenting the cruelty and calculating destruction. But it would also show the transformation, the possibility of change, the hope that even the worst people could choose to be better. They worked on it together, Daniel, his mother, Hannah, and Elena. It was painful, excavating all those old wounds, documenting the lives destroyed. Hannah had to face each victim's story, really see the human cost of Victoria's actions. There were times she couldn't continue, overwhelmed by the weight of harm she'd caused. 47 lives, she said one night, staring at the photos they'd gathered of victims. 47 people whose worlds I helped destroy. How does anyone come back from that? One day at a time, Elena said. One small act of redemption at a time. It'll never be enough. If I spent the rest of my life helping people, it wouldn't balance the scales. Maybe it's not about balance. Maybe it's about direction. Are you moving toward light or darkness? Are you creating or destroying? The memorial website launched on a Thursday morning with no fanfare, just a quiet announcement through the foundation. But word spread quickly, and within hours it had thousands of visitors. The responses ranged from fury to hope, condemnation to inspiration. Some victims reached out, wanting to share their stories more fully. Others wanted nothing to do with it. One man whose father had been destroyed by the Kanes sent a single line, "Knowing she suffers with guilt helps me sleep better." But there were other messages too. A woman who'd been embezzling from her company wrote that Hannah's story made her turn herself in. A young executive caught in a corruption scandal said the memorial gave him hope that redemption was possible. A suicide prevention hotline reported several callers mentioning the website as a reason to keep fighting. "You're helping people," Elena told Hannah as they read through the responses. "Victoria's crimes are helping people understand consequences. That's different from redemption." But redemption came in unexpected ways. Marcus called to say that Chef Laurent wanted to hire someone from Hannah's foundation, an ex-convict who'd been imprisoned for financial crimes and was now trying to rebuild. Patricia Chen began hosting monthly dinners at Aurelia for families affected by white-collar crime, with Hannah coordinating support services. Margaret Kane Edwards' first wife became a regular volunteer at the foundation. Her quiet presence a reminder that survival was possible even after the worst betrayals. It was during one of these volunteer sessions that another ghost from the past appeared. A man in an expensive suit walked into the foundation office, and Hannah went rigid with recognition. "William Chen," she breathed. Elena didn't recognize the name, but she recognized the type: polished, powerful, dangerous. He surveyed the small office with amused contempt before focusing on Hannah. "Victoria," he said, ignoring her chosen name. "Or should I say, Hannah, I've been watching your little redemption tour with interest." "What do you want, William?" "What I've always wanted, what you and Edward owed me before your dramatic fall from grace." He pulled out a folder. $3 million you borrowed for that Riverside deal. I want it back with interest. That debt was Edward's. That debt was yours too. Your signature is right here. He showed them a document. Legal binding and very much enforceable. Hannah stared at the paper, Victoria's elaborate signature mocking her from the past. "I don't have $3 million. "No, but you have access to much more than that, don't you? Edward's hidden fortune. Don't pretend you don't know where it is. That money was seized by the FBI. Not all of it. William's smile was sharp. I know Edward. He would have had backup plans, hidden accounts even you didn't know about. Find them, or I'll make sure everyone knows that Hannah Gale is still paying Victoria Kane's debts. How do you think your victims will feel knowing you're sitting on hidden millions while claiming poverty? After he left, Hannah collapsed into a chair. He's right. Edward did have other accounts. I found references to them in his papers, probably another 10 or 15 million scattered in various havens. You never mentioned this. Because I wanted nothing to do with it. That money is poisoned, built on suffering. Hannah rubbed her face. But if William goes public, it'll destroy everything we've built. The foundation, the memorial, any good I've managed to do. So we find the money and turn it over to the authorities. It's not that simple. The accounts are probably under false names in countries that don't cooperate with U.S. law enforcement. Edward was too smart to make them easily traceable. Elena could see Hannah struggling, the old Victoria instincts surfacing, the strategic thinking, the calculation of angles and leverage. It was disturbing to watch, like seeing a recovered alcoholic holding a bottle. What would Victoria do? Elena asked carefully. Victoria would find the accounts, access the money, pay William, and use the rest to rebuild her power base. Hannah's voice was flat, analytical. She'd see this as an opportunity, not a crisis. And what will Hannah do? Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Hannah will tell the truth and accept the consequences. She called a meeting of the foundation's board, the victims' families, who'd become involved with the memorial, even Daniel and his mother. She told them everything about William Chen, the hidden accounts, the threat to the foundation's reputation. The room erupted in arguments. Some wanted her to pay William to protect the foundation. Others wanted her to find the money and distribute it to victims. A few demanded she step down immediately to prevent contamination of their work. Daniel's mother raised her hand for silence. What do you want to do, Hannah? I want to find the money and turn it over properly. But I need help. I need people watching me, making sure I don't fall back into Victoria's patterns. This is exactly the kind of situation that used to bring out the worst in me, pressure, threats, the temptation of easy money. Then we'll help now, Mrs. Morrison said simply. We'll be your accountability partners. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked together to trace Edward's hidden accounts. Hannah's knowledge of his methods, combined with the group's oversight, slowly uncovered a network of shell companies and false identities hiding nearly $18 million. The temptation was overwhelming. Elena watched Hannah stare at account numbers that could solve every financial problem she'd ever have, could fund the foundation, for decades could buy her security and comfort. I could take just enough to pay William, Hannah said one night, exhausted from days of research. No one would know. You would know. Victoria wouldn't have cared. You're not Victoria. Aren't I? Look how easily I found these accounts. How naturally I'm thinking about hiding money and manipulating systems. Maybe I'm just Victoria playing at being Hannah. Elena grabbed her shoulders. You're Hannah choosing not to be Victoria. Every moment you don't take that money, you're choosing. That's what makes you different. They turned everything over to the FBI, who were amazed at the thoroughness of their research. The agent handling the case looked at Hannah with a mixture of respect and suspicion. You could have taken this money and disappeared. Why didn't you? Because I'm trying to be someone different than I was. That must be exhausting. It is, Hannah admitted, but it's worth it. William Chen was arrested 2 days later, caught in an FBI sting trying to extort the $3 million. It turned out he'd been running similar schemes on other former associates of Edward's, trading on fear and hidden debts. But the victory felt hollow. Hannah knew there would always be another William, another ghost from Victoria's past demanding payment. She couldn't escape who she'd been, could only choose who to be now. The memorial project grew beyond anything they'd imagined. Families of victims from across the country began contributing stories, photos, memories of who their loved ones had been before corporate crime destroyed them. It became a testament not just to loss, but to the human cost of greed and power. Hannah spoke at universities and law schools, telling her story as a warning. She was often met with hostility, students demanding to know how she could stand there free and rebuilt when her victims remained destroyed. "I can't undo the harm," she would say, "but I can try to prevent others from walking my path. I can show you how easy it is to lose yourself to ambition and how hard it is to find yourself again." One evening, after a particularly harsh reception at Columbia Law School, where she'd been called a murderer, and worse, Hannah sat in Elena's studio watching her paint. "Do you think I'm doing any good?" she asked. "Or am I just performing redemption the way Victoria performed power?" Elena paused in her work. "What do you think?" "I think maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the performance of good is better than the authentic practice of evil. Maybe choosing to help even from selfish motives like guilt still helps. That's a very Victoria way of thinking. Or maybe it's just honest. I'll never be purely good, never be completely free of her. The best I can hope for is to be more Hannah than Victoria, more helpful than harmful." Elena turned from her painting to study her friend. 2 years had passed since that night at the Starlight Gala, when Victoria Kane had publicly destroyed herself to free Hannah Gale. The woman sitting in her studio now was neither of those people entirely. She was something new, forged from the fragments of both. "You know what I think?" Elena said. "I think you're overthinking it. You wake up, you choose to help. Instead of hurt, you go to sleep. The next day, you choose again. It's not about being purely good or completely redeemed. It's about the choice made over and over to be better than you were." Hannah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "When did you become so wise?" "When I decided to forgive the woman who helped destroy my father. That choice changed me too." As autumn settled over New York, bringing with it the anniversary of the Starlight Gala, Hannah received an unexpected invitation. The gala was being held again this time as a fundraiser for victims of corporate crime. The organizers wanted her to speak. "It's a terrible idea," Hannah said, showing Elena the invitation. "That place, those people, it's where Victoria was, at her most powerful and cruel." "It's also where Hannah was at her bravest," Elena pointed out. "Where you chose truth over comfort, justice over security." Hannah attended wearing a simple black dress she'd bought at a department store. No jewelry except a small pendant Margaret Kane had given her, a butterfly symbol of transformation. The ballroom was filled with familiar faces, some friendly, many hostile, all curious. She stood at the podium where 2 years ago she'd confessed her crimes, looking out at an audience that had once feared Victoria Kane, and now didn't quite know what to make of Hannah Gale. "2 years ago, I stood in this room and destroyed myself," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I revealed Victoria Kane as a fraud, and Hannah Gale as a coward. I thought that confession would be an ending, but it was actually a beginning." She talked about the memorial, the foundation, the daily choice to be better. She talked about the victims she'd met, the stories she'd heard, the weight of harm that could never be fully lifted. She talked about Daniel Morrison and his mother, who'd chosen to build rather than destroy. "I don't stand here as a success story," she concluded. "I stand here as a cautionary tale and a possibility, a warning about what greed and fear can create, and hope that even the worst choices don't have to be final. Victoria Kane is dead, but her victims live with what she did every day." Hannah Gale is alive, trying to honor those victims by preventing others. That's all I can offer, not redemption, but effort. Not forgiveness, but the promise to keep trying. The applause was scattered, uncomfortable, but genuine from some corners. Elena saw Daniel Morrison in the audience, his expression unreadable. His mother sat beside him, and she was crying. After the speech, people approached Hannah with their own stories of crimes committed, victims created, guilt carried. A young banker confessed to destroying evidence that could have saved a small company. A lawyer admitted to fabricating charges that had sent an innocent man to prison. They wanted to know how to start over, how to begin making amends. "You start by stopping," Hannah told them. "Stop the harm, tell the truth, accept the consequences. Then you spend every day after trying to balance the scales, knowing you never fully will." As the evening ended, Daniel Morrison approached them. "I hated you," he said simply. "For years you were the face of everything that destroyed my father. Even after the memorial, part of me still hated you." "That's understandable," Hannah said. "But tonight, seeing you here, seeing how you've changed, my father would have forgiven you. He believed in redemption, in the possibility of change. So I'm going to try to believe in it too. Not for you, but for him. To honor who he was, not who Victoria Kane forced him to become." He extended his hand, and Hannah shook it, tears streaming down both their faces. Later, walking through Central Park in the cool autumn night, Elena and Hannah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. "Could you have imagined this?" Hannah asked. "When you were that frightened waitress at Aurelia, could you have imagined we'd end up here? Never. I wanted justice for my father, maybe revenge. I never imagined friendship." Is that what we are, friends after everything? Elena considered this. We're something more complicated than friends. We're people who've seen each other at our worst and chosen to help each other toward our best. I don't know what to call that. Family, Hannah said softly. Chosen family, built from forgiveness and understanding rather than blood. They walked in comfortable silence until Hannah spoke again. The book is almost finished. My editor says it could help a lot of people understand how ordinary people become corporate criminals. What will you call it? The space between names, a journey from Hannah to Victoria and back. It's about identity, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, and how those stories can save or destroy us. And which story are you telling yourself now? Hannah smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. That I'm someone trying to be better. Not good, maybe never good, but better. Every day a little better. As they reached the edge of the park, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the speech online. Chef Laurent says to tell you both he's proud. He's naming a new dish, the transformation. It starts as one thing and becomes something completely different by the end. He says you'll understand. They laughed, standing there in the New York night, two women who'd started as enemies and become something like family. The city sprawled around them, full of its own stories of rise and fall, cruelty and kindness, destruction and rebuilding. What now? Hannah asked. Now we keep going, Elena said. Keep choosing to be better, keep helping where we can, keep remembering that change is possible. Even for monsters. Especially for monsters. They have the farthest to travel, but that makes their journey the most important. As they parted ways, Elena to her studio, Hannah to her queen's apartment. Both women carried with them the weight of the past and the possibility of the future. Victoria Kane was dead, but her shadow would always follow Hannah Gale. The difference was that now Hannah walked toward the light instead of deeper into darkness, and she didn't walk alone. The story that had begun with cruelty in an upscale restaurant had become something neither of them could have predicted, a testament to the power of choice, the possibility of change, and the strange redemption that comes not from erasing the past, but from choosing a different future. In her apartment that night, Hannah sat at her computer typing the final words of her book. Victoria Kane was a monster I created to survive. Hannah Gale is the human I'm choosing to become. The space between those names is where I live now, neither innocent nor irredeemable, but simply determinedly, hopefully human.